Chapter 1336. Bowie Cow. Go and help him now. The Jade Emperor gritted his teeth and decided to send one of the 5 heavenly emperors to help Xiaohao. This would put the Jade Emperor under great pressure, but without the help of Bowie Cow and Xiaohao, the 6 great sages would immediately pull themselves together and even gain a slight advantage. My magic treasure. Why can't I use it? In contrast, the Heavenly Court's army found that all their attributes had dropped by about 3 times, and even their fleeing speed was no exception. Heavens! My demon power has increased by 3 times. What's wrong with my feet? They feel as heavy as lead. You set a trap? Seeing that the 6 great sages didn't look too surprised, the Jade Emperor came to a realization. The green light emitted from his body and the red light from the opponents were all traps set by the opponents, and he had foolishly fallen into their trap. Good. Gohan didn't put on any pretense and directly let Liu Ling block Xiaohao for him. He continued to frantically search for the Celestial Immortals and Zenith Heaven Golden Immortals hidden in Yuan Ko's army, and then sent them back to the Dimensional Whirlpool one by one. When the Jade Emperor gave this order, the Heavenly Court's army, which was already in a precarious situation, completely collapsed. Seeing countless of their comrades die under the unbridled attacks of the Nether and Universe-level bandits, and the original 100,000 celestial soldiers and generals were reduced to less than 40,000. The remaining 40,000 celestial soldiers and generals finally couldn't take it anymore. After a wave of terrified screams, they immediately threw down their weapons and began to scatter and flee. Yes, we are indeed going to die here. The Jade Emperor looked up at the sky and sighed. But before we die, at least let us know where our books are. Where did this damned red and green light come from? Your Majesty, hearing this, the expressions of the other 3 heavenly emperors became extremely frightened. They had come with the relaxed mentality of teasing their prey. They never thought that the final result would be like this. Were they going to die in this inexplicable place? Brothers, kill. Take this opportunity to kill all the heavenly soldiers and generals. A cry rang out from the Yuan Bandit Alliance's army, whose stats had been tripled out of thin air, and their aura soared to the extreme as they charged at the unfortunate celestial soldiers and generals. Because their stats had been tripled, even escaping was an extravagant hope for these celestial soldiers and generals. All they could do was put up a brief resistance before they were cut down as easily as if they were chopping vegetables. Chao Yu. The Jade Emperor thought for a while and nodded. I've heard of this name. Is it that Chao Yu who did it all in one go? Sir, it's ready to be activated. Chao Yao nodded. Next, his figure floated up into the sky, and a voice as massive as Mount Tai appeared behind him. It was so loud that it seemed as though the entire world could hear it. As Chao Yao's words, which were famous throughout Huaxia and the world, rang out, the bodies of both sides lit up with red and green lights. But there was no other way now. The Jade Emperor could only grit his teeth and persevere. He had to get rid of that damn Gohan as soon as possible. Otherwise, even if he won the final victory, the Heavenly Court would only be left with a few commanders without an army after killing 6 great sages. How could the Celestial Emperors, whose strength had been tripled, be a match for the 6 great sages who had tripled in strength? With this attack, all 4 Celestial Emperors suffered heavy injuries. Although such injuries were not enough to kill the 4 Celestial Emperors, it was easy enough to put them in an absolutely disadvantageous position. The Heavenly Court's allied forces on the ground were already in such a miserable state, but the 4 Sky Emperors in the sky weren't much better off. Like their own troops, their strength had dropped by 3 times in an instant, while their opponent's strength had skyrocketed by 3 times. There was now a gap of 6 times between them, and this was undoubtedly a fatal change for the 4 Sky Emperors. From the first second that their strength changed, the 6 great saints abruptly unleashed their attacks to the limit and directly killed the 4 Sky Emperors who appeared to be in a daze because of the green light that covered their bodies. No, unexpectedly, Wu Zetian refused Yamada no Orochi's suggestion neatly. She said, I've been acting with the 5 of them for so long and set up such a good trap. If I don't tell them the whole story, I won't be able to sleep at night." However, Gahan also knew that although Liu Ling was indeed strong, she was no match for Qing Emperor Xiaohao. The time that Liu Ling could buy for him was probably not much. Thinking of this, Gahan's attacks became more and more fierce. More fairy immortals and Zenith Heaven Golden Immortals were sent back into the dimensional vortex by Gahan. After Wu Zetian snorted coldly, she asked the Jade Emperor, "Hao Yin, have you heard the name Chao Yin?" "Xiaohao, what are you doing? Kill that Gahan for me." The Jade Emperor, who had been paying attention to the situation on the ground, scolded his younger brother Xiaohao angrily. "This isn't a trap. It's you who didn't keep your word. You reap what you sow. We're just playing along with you to put on a show." "Ha ha!" Qi Tian Jindi laughed complacently, his eyes full of ridicule. "No, you've not lost. You're going to die here." Wu Zetian let out a long laugh. The golden bells of heaven and earth in her hands made a series of killing sounds. "Hao Yin, let's end our 800-year feud here." However, before the flame could touch Gahan, it was blocked by thousands of sword lights. In the end, the flame and the sword lights perished together and disappeared in the air. "Yes, it's that Chao Yin." Wu Zetian nodded. Her face was full of excitement and pride. Obviously, she was immersed in the pleasure of explaining the ins and outs of the matter. Although Chao Yin is only a Dragon Realm Yuan Ko, his skill can even make you, a Celestial Emperor, fall for it. How ridiculous! How ridiculous! There's no need to talk nonsense with him. Let's just kill him. Yamada and no Orochi, who had the most violent temper, said. At the same time, he also made a very correct suggestion. Whether it was the protagonist or the antagonist, explaining the cause and effect of the other party's death was a very stupid thing to do. The coalition army of Yuan Dynasty was 3 times stronger than the army of Yuan Dynasty, and the celestial soldiers and generals were 3 times weaker. The difference between the two was 6 times, which was a gap that could not be overcome with courage and morale. The remaining 40,000 heavenly soldiers were quickly caught up by the Yuan Ko's army. These soldiers were easily killed by their opponents like scarecrows. The casualties of the Yuan Ko's army were almost 0. My strength has increased. Courage is the key to fighting. The first spurt of energy will weaken, and the third will be exhausted. When the enemy is exhausted, I am full. When a great country is unfathomable, there is always fear. When I see their ruts in chaos and their flags in defeat, I will chase them. The Jade Emperor's idea was very correct. Getting rid of Gahan right now was indeed the best way. Unfortunately, the Jade Emperor's decision was a little too late. If the Jade Emperor had ordered the Purple Emperor Bo Ikao to kill Gahan a minute earlier, it would have been fine. But in reality, he was a minute too late. This time I've lost. If it was in the past, the Jade Emperor would have definitely sent his army to tear the other party to shreds when he saw the other party's mocking expression. But now, the Jade Emperor had already lost the interest. He seemed to have accepted his fate. Instead, he calmly admitted defeat. The bodies of the Yuan Ko's army lit up with a scarlet light, while the bodies of the Heavenly Court's army lit up with a dark green light. Even Gahan, Liu Ling, and the 11 Desolation level experts in the sky were no exception. Their bodies lit up with the colors that represented their respective factions. But in reality, Liu Ling was as tough as a piece of sticky candy. She firmly entangled Xiaohao, even if she had to use her own body to block Xiaohao's flames. She wanted to stop Xiaohao in the sky. Left with no other choice, Xiaohao could only kill Liu Ling before he could chase after Gahan. In their state of escape, the Heavenly Court's army's footsteps were extremely disorderly. The flags in their hands were also thrown to the ground like trash. For the sake of the other escapees, they had truly been defeated. My immortal power. Why is there only a third of my immortal power left? Me too. I feel like my strength has tripled. I feel like I can kill everyone now. The Yuan Ko's army was the first to speak excitedly. Almost all of the soldiers found that their strength had tripled. This was an all-around increase, including their demon power, strength, vision, and so on. It was equivalent to tripling all their attributes. We've finally been defeated. At the same time, in the core of the Yuan Ko's army, Liu Ban's defeated Heavenly Court's army finally heaved a sigh of relief. He sighed, then said to Chao Yu beside him, "Can you use your skill now? Gohan, leave this opponent to me. Continue to kill those Zenith Heaven Golden Immortals." Fleeting Time Lin appeared at the crucial moment and blocked Xiaohao's attack for Gohan. Dying. Xiaohao was like a large bird that flew towards the cold on the battlefield. At the same time, he shot out an extremely fierce orange flame from his mouth. Wherever the flame passed, even the air would start to burn. The power of the flame was truly terrifying. Big brother, this Lun Yin clan's opponent is too difficult. She doesn't care about her life at all. Give me 5 more minutes, and I'll be able to kill this remnant of the Lun Yin clan in 5 minutes. Xiaohao responded irritably, but helplessly. By now, his battle with Liu Yin had already lasted for about 10 minutes. Although Liu Yinling's strength was far from his own, Xiaohao should have been able to shake her off very quickly. However, the Jade Emperor couldn't understand how he had fallen into the enemy's trap. Or rather, what the hell was the enemy's trap? He didn't even know what was going on before he fell into such a panic. Chapter 1337. Chao Yu, anyone who went to junior high school should know this person and his famous saying, "The first spurt of energy will weaken, and the third will be exhausted." Is Chao Yu? Is this the effect of his skill? Let this emperor guess. The Jade Emperor said while panting, "The effect of his skill is to reduce the enemy's strength by 3 times and increase his own strength by 3 times. In total, it's a total of 9 times. Am I right? Do I still need you to guess? Could it be that our Jade Emperor still can't feel his own strength weakening?" Wu Zetian sneered, her face filled with an insolent smile. Mocking the Jade Emperor to her heart's content was Wu Zetian's dream. She had been waiting for this day for 800 years. Of course, I don't need to guess. I just didn't expect that a puny Chao Yu would actually be a prehistoric Yuan Ko, causing us to fall into such a trap. The Jade Emperor said in annoyance. This was also the biggest doubt in his heart. He knew about Chao Yu's story. He had only commanded a small battle with no more than 30,000 people. Although he had left a famous saying in history, he did not have a high reputation. If such a guy became a Yuan Ko, he would at most be a dragon Yuan Ko. How could he become a prehistoric Yuan Ko? Ha ha ha. How, Ian? I didn't expect you to deceive others and deceive yourself. Who told you that Mr. Chao Yu is a prehistoric Yuan Ko? How could that Chao Yu be a prehistoric Yuan Ko? Wu Ziqian laughed even more exaggeratedly. To tell you the truth, Mr. Chao Yu is only a tiger Yuan Ko. What? That's impossible. How could he be a tiger-level Yuan bandit? The Jade Emperor howled in disbelief. I'm a dignified celestial emperor, a prehistoric expert, an existence that can suppress the entire world. How could a mere tiger-level bandit affect me? The Jade Emperor's disbelief wasn't fake. He was truly shocked by the news. On one side was the weakest tiger-class Yuan Ko, who was equivalent to an ancient sword tier. On the other side was the incomparably powerful prehistoric tier Yuan Ko. Even if hundreds of thousands of tiger-class Yuan Ko attacked the Jade Emperor at the same time, the Jade Emperor would not be harmed at all, and their skills would be directly nullified by the huge difference in realm between the two. A tiger-class Yuan Ko skill would not be able to affect a prehistoric tier Yuan Ko. Therefore, the Jade Emperor did not believe that he would be affected by a tiger-grade Yuan Ko's skill. How, Yin? You think you're so knowledgeable and know everything in the world. Don't you know that there are military skills in the world? Wu Zetian coldly laughed. Military skills. The Jade Emperor was stunned, but he immediately reacted. This military influence skill referred to the skill that could affect 2 different armies. This skill was effective against the military strength of both sides. As long as the military strength of both sides was in a relatively stable state, this skill would be effective and would not be affected by the strength of the individual. I see. The Jade Emperor smiled bitterly and nodded. He finally understood why a puny tiger-class Yuan Ko skill could be effective against him. Although the Heavenly Court's army looked much stronger than Yuan Ko's army, both sides were actually evenly matched in terms of high-level combat power. Moreover, there was an extra 6 great sages. When added to the army, the strength of both sides was barely maintained at a state of equilibrium. That was why Qiao Yu's military skill could be effective. To activate the military skill, one needs to meet a rather harsh condition. Is a condition for Qiao Yu's military skill to be activated by us losing 3 battles? The Jade Emperor was not stupid. In fact, he was a little puzzled at the beginning. Why did the 6 great sages insist on fighting him 3 times? However, he quickly threw these doubts to the back of his mind. Now that he thought about it, it was probably a trap that they had dug for him. That's right. In order to activate Qiao Yu's military skill, 2 conditions must be met. Wu Ziqian raised 2 fingers and said, "First, there will be 3 duels between the generals of the 2 armies, and one side must win all of them. Second, after the 2 armies start fighting, one army must defeat the enemy's main force within an hour. Moreover, it must be an absolute defeat. Only when these 2 conditions are met can Qiao Yu's military skill be activated. Otherwise, it will be useless." "I understand." The Jade Emperor nodded emotionally. The first spurt of energy, the second decline, and the third exhaustion. Also, I see their ruts in chaos, and their flags in defeat, so I expel them. I remember these 2 sentences, but I never thought that I would be defeated by them. A man's battle requires courage. The first spurt of energy, the second decline, and the third exhaustion. When the enemy is exhausted, I am full, so I subdue them. A great country is unpredictable, and there is fear in it. I see their ruts in chaos, and their flags in defeat, so I expel them. This was a rather famous speech by Qiao Yu in the history books. It also contained his life's military principles, as well as the triggering conditions for his army force skill. Qiao Yu's army force skill could only be triggered when he defeated his opponent 3 times in a row and utterly crushed his opponent. So all of your initial show of weakness was just an act for me. Whether it was asking for allegiance or the position of Celestial Emperor, it was all to cover up your true motive for initiating the battle. No wonder you agreed to my request after winning 2 battles in a row and continued with the 3rd battle. I didn't expect this to be your true motive. This is in line with your intentions, right?" The Jade Emperor said bitterly. "That's right. Hao Tian, you're right. You're an idiot. To think that you still dare to sit on the position of Celestial Emperor. You're a complete idiot for jumping into the trap we've set for you. There's no one more idiotic than you in this world." Wu Ziqian mocked wantonly, and the Jade Emperor's expression turned as ugly as dried soy sauce. "Fine. I was careless and fell into the trap of you sinister and vicious villains. You despicable villains. Shameless." At this moment, the Jade Emperor seemed to have no other way to deal with the situation other than calling them shameless. "Hao Tian, you can say other things, but you can't call us despicable people. You can't call us shameless either, because you're the most shameless one." When Heaven's equal Jindy heard the Jade Emperor's insults, he walked out and scolded sternly. "If you, Hao Tian, had followed the rules and admitted defeat after we won 2 battles, sending us to the position of Celestial Emperor, we wouldn't have had a reason to proceed with the 3rd battle. Hao Tian, the reason why you lost was not because of the trap we set for you, but because you're a shameless bastard. You're the one who trampled on the promise and contract we made. You tore up your integrity, and your mind is filled with violence and treachery. If you had kept even a little bit of your promise, Qiao Yu's military force would not have been triggered. The one who really destroyed the Heavenly Court's army was not us, but you. The moment you chose to abandon your promise, you were destined to fail." Heaven's equal Jindy's words were like a sharp knife stabbing into the Jade Emperor's heart. Although the Jade Emperor wanted to refute Heaven's equal Jindy's words, he knew very well that what Heaven's equal Jindy said was the truth. If he kept his promise and allowed the 6 great sages to ascend to the position of Celestial Emperor after Yuan Ko won 2 battles, then Qiao Yu's military force would lose all conditions to trigger. The 6 great sages were taking a gamble. They bet that he would break his promise and walk into their trap. In the end, they won the gamble. He really became the fool and stepped into the trap that they had set in advance. Big brother, save me. Just as the Jade Emperor thought of this, a door suddenly opened in the void beside him. Qing Emperor Xiaohao, who was covered in blood, struggled to return to his brother's side. His body had already been pierced over 100 times, and golden blood was constantly flowing out of the wounds. His entire person had become extremely weak. Xiaohao, how did you become like this? There isn't even a single prehistoric realm expert down there. Even if your strength has been reduced by 3 times, how did you end up like this by those trash? Seeing Qing Emperor Xiaohao on the verge of death, the Great Emperor said angrily and painfully, "It's gone. Big brother, it's all gone." Qing Emperor Xiaohao spat out a mouthful of golden blood and said in a sobbing voice, "Our 100,000 heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals are all gone. They were all killed. I was besieged by all the Yuan Ko on the ground. That military governor, that Liu Ling, and that Artoria, their strength has been increased by 3 times. I'm really no match for them." At this point, Xiaohao spat out several mouthfuls of blood. With Xiaohao's return, the Yuan Ko on the ground burst into cheers, celebrating their victory. Military Governor Liu Ban, Liu Ling, and Artoria all flew to the battlefield in the sky and surrounded the 5 celestial emperors of the heavenly court. At this moment, there were only 5 people left on the battlefield. "Your Majesty, we can't delay any longer. Let's escape." Seeing that the situation was extremely bad, Scarlet Emperor South Pole, Immortal Wang, felt helpless. In the end, he tried to persuade the Jade Emperor, "Your Majesty, let's immediately escape in different directions. How many of us can escape counts? As long as we can preserve the Heavenly Court's inheritance, we haven't lost." South Pole, Immortal Wang, was right. They had indeed reached the point where they could escape as many as they could. In a situation where their strength had been reduced by 3 times, it was impossible for all 5 of them to escape. They could only escape in different directions through the void. This way, the 6 great sages would have to split into 3 teams to chase after them. At least 2 celestial emperors would survive. Heavenly Court, to think that he was already in such a miserable state. Chapter 1338. No, we can't escape. So what if 2 or 3 of us can escape? Are we going to be like these trash 800 years ago, living like rats in the dark underground for 800 years? No, absolutely not. The Jade Emperor stood up and said firmly, "If we escape, the foundation of our heavenly court for 100 years will be completely over, and we haven't lost yet." What? The Jade Emperor's words stunned all the surrounding sky sovereigns. The gap in strength had been forcibly widened by 9 times. Defeat was already inevitable. How could there still be any possibility of victory? Was this Jade Emperor's brain short-circuited? "I still have this." The Jade Emperor sneered and took out a long sword from the void. Seeing this long sword, the 6 great sages did not have any reaction, but the other 4 celestial emperors' expressions changed. Among them, Celestial Emperor Gaochen could not help but shout the name of this sword, Immortal Trapping Sword. Immortal Trapping Sword. The moment he saw this sword, Gahan also recognized it. It was the last lost immortal trapping sword of the 4 immortal slaying swords, and also the one that Guhan was missing. If he obtained this immortal trapping sword, then Guhan could nominally complete the 4 immortal slaying swords. However, this was just a copy of the game after all. This immortal trapping sword was just a pile of data. This gave Gahan a guess. Could it be that in reality, the immortal trapping sword was in the hands of the Jade Emperor of the Heavenly Court? Thinking of this, Gahan felt a headache. In the copy, he could use the power of the 6 great sages to force the Jade Emperor to the point where he could be killed at any time. However, in reality, the power of the Heavenly Court was still extremely strong. It was impossible for him to get the immortal trapping sword from the Jade Emperor alone. Back to the main topic, when the other 4 celestial emperors saw the Jade Emperor take out the immortal trapping sword, they understood what the Jade Emperor wanted to do. Among them, Qing Emperor Xiaohao hugged his big brother's thigh and persuaded, "Big brother, you can't. If you do this, your future will be over. You will never be able to reach the Sage Realm. Let me go." The Jade Emperor kicked Qing Emperor Xiaohao away and said sternly, "I'm the one who harmed you. If I don't make this decision today, I will be the greatest sinner of the heavenly court. Moreover, these 6 idiots will accompany me in death. I am satisfied. Not good. Quickly kill them." No matter how stupid the 6 great sages were, they could tell that the Jade Emperor was brewing some sort of killing move. Although they didn't know if this killing move had the power to reverse the situation, the 6 great sages didn't dare to take such a risk. Therefore, they immediately pounced on the Jade Emperor. "Help His Majesty block it." The 4 celestial emperors knew that it was time to decide the outcome of the battle. They immediately surrounded the Jade Emperor and used their own bodies to block the attacks of the 6 great sages. Although their strength was 9 times weaker than the Jade Emperors, they were still experts of the Great Desolate Era. It was not a problem for them to delay for a minute or two, but for the Jade Emperor, 10 seconds was enough. "Fellow Taoist, have you really made up your mind to kill me?" The moment the Jade Emperor made up his mind, a man who looked exactly like the Jade Emperor walked out of the Jade Emperor's body. However, he wore a Taoist robe and had a sage-like demeanor. He didn't have the domineering aura of the Jade Emperor at all. He seemed to be just a simple cultivator. He asked the Jade Emperor with a smile, "That's right. I must kill you today. Otherwise, both you and I will die." The Jade Emperor said, "Tao follows the laws of nature, predestined space destruction. Since you have made up your mind, then kill me." The Taoist nodded and said in a relaxed and joyful manner, it was as if killing him was a very small and insignificant matter. However, when it was time to make his move, the Jade Emperor hesitated. If he killed the Jade Emperor, he would say goodbye to his supreme dream forever. This would undoubtedly destroy his future. Just as the Jade Emperor hesitated again, a burst of miserable screams came from the mouth of his younger brother, Xiaohao. As the most seriously injured and the weakest of the 5 heaven emperors, Emperor Qing Xiaohao naturally became the breakthrough point chosen by the 6 great sages. 3 great sages attacked Xiaohao at the same time, hoping to kill him as quickly as possible. In this way, the entire defensive circle would be destroyed. The Jade Emperor would also face the attacks of the 6 great sages. "I will grind your bones and scatter your ashes." Seeing this scene, the Jade Emperor finally stopped hesitating. He closed his eyes, and the immortal thread sword in his hand pierced the head of the Taoist who looked exactly like him. The Tao can be said, but it is not the Tao. The name can be named, but it cannot be named. After the Taoist sang the last line of the song, his whole body turned into nothingness and disappeared in the air. At the same time, at the moment when the Taoist disappeared, 2 Taoists who looked exactly like the Jade Emperor appeared beside the Jade Emperor. After they looked at each other with a bitter smile, they walked into the Jade Emperor's body. In just a few seconds, the Jade Emperor, who seemed a little weak and unbearable, became mighty again, revealing his domineering momentum. Die! Before Yamada no Orochi, who was besieging Xiaohao, could react to what had happened, a sword pierced through one of its heads. Then, its head exploded under the blade of the sword. Yamada no Orochi took a few steps back in pain and wailed in pain. My head is completely destroyed." Yamada no Orochi howled. Under normal circumstances, the 8 heads of Yamada no Orochi could regenerate infinitely. But at this time, Orochi said that its head was completely destroyed. Could it be that the Jade Emperor's sword had completely destroyed one of Orochi's heads? Oh no, there's something wrong with this Hao Tian. Odin, who was attacking Xiaohao with lightning, immediately noticed that the Jade Emperor's situation was not right. As soon as his warning sounded, he became the Jade Emperor's second target. This time, the Jade Emperor did not even use the immortal trapping sword in his hand. He directly slapped Odin's face. Odin was sent flying. Wu Zetian, who was the third to besiege Xiaohao, saw that the situation was not good and retreated alone to avoid becoming the Jade Emperor's third target. As Wu Zetian retreated, the other three great sages also found that the situation had changed dramatically. The three of them, who were afraid of losing their lives, withdrew from the battle's circle immediately, even though victory was within their grasp. After a short fight between the two sides, they were once again facing each other in pairs. But this time, the Jade Emperor was no longer as weak as before. Instead, he was as majestic as a god of war. The six great sages were almost out of breath due to the pressure of his imposing manner. Hao Tian, what had happened to him? Did Chao Yu's military force lose its effect? Ping Tian Jindi said in disbelief. No, the other celestial emperors still have green light on their bodies, and they're still weak. Only Hao Tian's condition isn't right. What did he do? Odin, whose left cheek was swollen with a palm mark, said, Very good, very good. You actually forced me to use a peerless weapon to kill my true self. Very good. You're all very good. Today, I will use your lives as a sacrifice to my true self. The Jade Emperor's face did not show joy or sorrow, but his monstrous killing intent could not be concealed no matter what. True self? 3 corpses? Liu Ling seemed to understand something and covered her mouth in surprise. What true self? What 3 corpses? Tell us clearly. The 6 great sages noticed that Liu Ling seemed to know something and immediately asked impatiently. This is a method passed down in the heavenly court to surpass the prehistoric level. Liu Ling replied, Legend has it that as long as the prehistoric level Yuan Ko of the heavenly court can use his own understanding of Tao to cut off his 3 corpses, that is, good, evil, and true self, these 3 mysterious things, he can surpass the realm of rules and reach the realm of Tao of heaven. And Tao of heaven can allow the prehistoric level experts to have power that surpasses the prehistoric level. The good and evil corpses are easy to cut off, but the true self is the most difficult of the 3 corpses. If a prehistoric level expert can cut off his true self, it means that the door to becoming a sage has been opened to him. What? Liu Ling's words made everyone's expression change. Wu Zetian, who was the most arrogant just now, became extremely frightened and said, I just saw Hao Tian kill a guy who looks exactly like him. Is that his true self? Has this Hao Tian already surpassed the prehistoric level? Hearing what Wu Zetian said, the 6 great sages all took a step back. Beyond the level of great desolation, this was not an existence that they could provoke. No, cutting off the 3 corpses is not like what it means. You have to cut off these 3 thoughts. On the contrary, you have to completely separate these 3 thoughts from your own divine sense. From then on, these 3 corpses will become independent but controlled by the deity. You can't just cut them off for anything. On the contrary, if Hao Tian kills his true self directly, it will completely cut off his path of advancement. He can no longer become a sage by cutting off the 3 corpses. He will forever stay at the prehistoric level and completely lose the possibility of advancement. Liu Ling said with certainty, I didn't expect that the Liu clan actually has the method of cutting off the 3 corpses to become a sage, and you know in such detail. Liu Ling's words also reached the Jade Emperor's ears. The Jade Emperor looked at Liu Ling in surprise. He could not understand why the Liu clan, which was a human, knew his cultivation methods so well. However, the Jade Emperor was too lazy to think so much now. He just said lightly, Yes, as you said, I have cut off my path of transcending the prehistoric level, but you forced me to do so. Only by cutting off my true self can I get rid of the shackles of this military force skill. At the same time, I will take back the good and evil corpses that I have killed. Now, my power is no longer reduced by 3 times. After merging with the good and evil corpses, my power has increased by 3 times. You evildoers, today, you will be buried with me for the way of heaven. The Jade Emperor's killing intent instantly filled the entire sky. Chapter 1339. Everyone, don't be afraid of him. He's only strengthened by 3 times. We're also strengthened by 3 times. Plus, the weakening effect of the other 4 is still there. We still have the advantage. Wu Zetian encouraged them. The great sages nodded. Everyone, I'll deal with the other 4 alone. You guys attack Hao Tian together. Odin said at the same time. He took over the task of dealing with the other 4 Sky Kings. Actually, Odin was being crafty here. It looked like he was taking on the most important task of dealing with the 4 Sky Kings at the same time. But in reality, dealing with the 4 Sky Kings who had been weakened by 3 times was not a difficult task. On the contrary, the current Hao Tian made Odin's heart tremble. Odin had a feeling that the Jade Emperor's strength was not as simple as having been tripled. The other 5 great sages did not feel anything out of the ordinary with Odin's suggestion. They all charged at the Jade Emperor at the same time. 5 prehistoric level Yuan attacking one opponent at the same time. This was a shocking battle. It was so powerful that it seemed like the entire world was about to be torn apart. You idiots! Do you think that you can win by forcing me to this state? No, you're asking for it. This time, I won't even leave your souls behind. The Jade Emperor swung the Captus sword in his hand. A sword aura so powerful that it seemed like it could cut the entire world in half burst forth. The 5 great sages instinctively used their own strength to defend themselves. But when they collided with the sword aura, the 5 great sages did not even have shred of resistance. They were all sent flying by the sword aura. The Otto King was the worst off. His leather cover had been completely cut open, revealing a bloody flesh that no one had seen before. The other 4 great sages also spat out a dozen mouthfuls of blood. Everyone's aura suddenly became dispirited. It was as if the sword aura had ripped out their muscles and bones. Just one sword chi had sent all 5 great sages flying. This did not seem to be a gap in strength, but a gap in realm. The Jade Emperor and the 6 great sages seemed to have entered 2 different realms, a realm that could completely crush the 6 great sages. What? What the hell is going on? Even if Hao Tian's strength is 3 times stronger, he can't be this strong. Heaven's equal Jindi said in disbelief as he spat out a dozen mouthfuls of blood. This feeling is even more terrifying than when I faced Jitian Jindi all those years ago. There seems to be a kind of power that isolates the vitality of the world and the sword chi just now. This is no longer a simple rule power. The remaining 7 heads of Orochi said in horror at the same time. No, I'm afraid this is no longer the power of the primordial stage. Has Hao Tian surpassed the primordial stage and reached the legendary sage? Ping Tian Jindi said in disbelief. Impossible. Hao Tian has already killed his true self. He has already completely severed the possibility of becoming a saint. It is absolutely impossible for him to surpass the great desolate realm. Wu Zetian said as she gritted her teeth. Ha ha, now you have seen my power. This is all thanks to all of you. Because of all of you, I was forced to kill my true self. That's why I have my current strength. I'm already invincible. The Jade Emperor's eyes flashed with the flames of revenge and anger. Although he said that he was invincible, he did not feel happy at all. Instead, he became more and more resentful. What the hell is going on? Why is Hao Tian so powerful? Wu Zetian raised her head and asked Lian Yanling, who did not dare to join the siege against the Jade Emperor. She could only cooperate with Odin to deal with the other 4 celestial emperors. I don't know. Lian Yanling's answer was somewhat despairing. However, they could not figure out why the Jade Emperor had become so powerful. The 5 great sages could not resist the Jade Emperor at all. The advantage of the whole battlefield seemed to have returned to the Jade Emperor's hands after a big turn. You don't need to know so much. It's enough for you to die. The Jade Emperor shook the immortal trapping sword in his hand and laughed sinisterly. Hurry up and run. You can split into 6 groups and escape in 6 different directions. If I am distracted, I might miss 1 or 2. Hurry up and run, huh? The Jade Emperor seemed to be persuading the 6 great sages to escape, but in fact, he just wanted to play a game of cat and mouse. He did not want to kill these 6 guys so easily. These 6 guys had actually forced him to completely cut off his path to becoming a sage. He must toy with these great sages to the extreme, magnifying their fear of death to the extreme. He must let death fill every one of their cells. Only then would he slaughter these 6 guys. In the Jade Emperor's imagination, after understanding the difference in strength between the 2 sides, these 6 great sages, each with their own selfish motives, would escape without hesitation, allowing him to play a happy game of cat and mouse. However, the Jade Emperor did not expect that none of the 6 great sages would escape. They were still firmly united, standing opposite the Jade Emperor, facing this seemingly invincible enemy. Seeing this scene, the Jade Emperor was a little confused. He felt strange and said, "The 6 of you are actually not escaping? Have you changed your temperament? Or have you decided to give up the useless escape and self-destruct like 800 years ago?" "No, the 6 of us have not changed our temperament, nor do we plan to self-destruct." Wu Ziqian shook her head, and then a trace of an unfathomable expression appeared on her face. "We originally thought that we could kill you with our own strength, but in the end, we still need that person to do it." "Yes. I can't believe that she still needs to do it. How vexing." The rest of the great sages also revealed a wry smile, which made the Jade Emperor have a very bad feeling in his heart. "I can't talk nonsense with them anymore. Kill them first." The Jade Emperor decided to end the nonsense segment. Once again, his whole person was unstoppable, ready to kill the 6 great sages in one blow. "Zetian, I'll leave it to you." The 6 great sages, including Odin, who was still entangled with the 4 celestial emperors, spread out in 4 directions at the same time. At the same time, a sword chi that was not weaker than the Jade Emperor rose from the ground to the sky, forcibly stopping the Jade Emperor. When the 2 sword chi calmed down, the Jade Emperor finally saw the old opponent in front of him clearly. "I Ching, you've also resurrected," the Jade Emperor said through gritted teeth. In fact, when the 6 great sages said that they would let another person do it, the Jade Emperor had already guessed that the opponent was likely to be I Ching, because in the whole world, only I Ching could make him feel a little afraid. "It's not really resurrection. I prefer to call it rebirth," I Ching said with a smile. "You've really hidden yourself well, to actually only show up now," the Jade Emperor said, squinting his eyes. "I thought you would rush out at the first moment to fight me." If these 6 great sages didn't think that they already had victory in their hands and wanted me to give the opportunity for revenge to them, of course, I will be the first to rush out, I Ching said with a smile. "Oomph. If you come out with them, as long as you can stop me from killing my true self, then maybe you really have a chance to kill me. Unfortunately, you've been dragged down by these 6 idiots. Now I'm invincible. Even you can't be my opponent. Go to hell." As the Jade Emperor's voice fell, countless divine lights filled the sky and strangled I Ching. In the face of the Jade Emperor's invincible attack, I Ching did not panic. He used his finger as a sword and slashed down at the divine lights that filled the sky. These divine lights were broken in an instant by I Ching. So strong. Seeing this scene, the 6 great sages gasped at the same time. I Ching did not even use a sword. She directly used her finger to break the Jade Emperor's attack. It should be known that even if they used their full strength, it would be difficult to do so. Of course, the Jade Emperor knew that it was impossible to defeat I Ching with such an attack alone. However, the Jade Emperor still felt deeply humiliated and angry in his heart. I Ching actually looked down on him so much. She did not even use a sword. She actually only used a finger to fight with him. Did she think that she could defeat him with a finger? Under such anger, the Jade Emperor's strength broke out to a more powerful level. At the same time, he also got close to I Ching. Both sides directly carried out a battle in the air that was beyond the imagination of all the primitive level experts. Is this the limit of power? Such a battle not only shocked the 6 great sages, but also Gahan, who was watching the battle on the side, was deeply shocked. He was not shocked by the strength of the 2 sides in the battle, but shocked by the fighting power that both sides showed in the battle that transcended the rules. Gohan asked himself if he rushed to the battlefield to help I Ching with his current strength. He was afraid that he would not even be able to withstand the aftermath of the battle between both sides. He would die under the attack of the Jade Emperor in less than 10 seconds. Ever since he had comprehended the laws, Gohan had always felt that no one could defeat him in terms of realm. Even if it was the Sword Emperor, their strongest trump card was merely the power of laws. But through the battle between the Jade Emperor and I Ching, Gohan actually saw a power that transcended the power of rules. This was a power that Gohan had never imagined. In the face of such power, Gohan was as fragile as a child. This is my next direction. However, Gohan was not frightened by such power. Instead, he became a little comfortable. After creating the sword technique Chaos Coalescence, Gohan felt that his swordsmanship could not improve at all. He could not find the direction to move forward. It was not until he saw the battle between the Jade Emperor and I Ching that Gohan found the direction to improve. This road of swordsmanship could take a step forward again. Chapter 1340. Follow me. Gohan, who was acting as a spectator at the edge of the battlefield, suddenly heard I Ching's voice. Before he could react, he felt his body lighten, and then he floated up. My body. Gohan looked at his original position and was shocked to find that his physical body was still standing there, but his consciousness had clearly flown up. Could this be an out-of-body experience? While Gohan was thinking, his consciousness had already floated to the center of the battlefield. He was surrounded by all sorts of shockwaves from the battle between the Jade Emperor and Jitian. As long as he was touched by these shockwaves, all sword bearers below Spirit Sword rank, including Yuenko, would die without a doubt. Spirit Sword bearers could at most last 3 to 4 seconds, while immortal sword bearers might be able to last 1 or 2 minutes, but that was to no avail. In the end, they would all die. It was in such a dangerous area of the battlefield that Gohan's consciousness could move quickly, completely unaffected by the aftershocks of the battle. Finally, it floated to I Ching's side and then entered her body. This is I Ching's vision. When Gohan entered I Ching's body, he found that he had entered a state of sharing vision with I Ching, or rather, it was not just vision sharing. Gohan could clearly feel the various sensations in I Ching's body, and even the flow of the sword essence in her body. Gohan could even faintly feel the power that surpassed the rules in I Ching's body. Gohan instantly understood I Ching's intention. I Ching wanted to let Gohan experience this battle from an unprecedented first-person perspective. This was far more useful in improving Gohan's strength and comprehension than a spectator's perspective. This was indeed the case. From I Ching's perspective, Gohan absorbed everything in front of him like a drunkard. Because Gohan was just a spectator, he didn't need to consider the various matters and techniques of the battle like I Ching did. He only needed to analyze and absorb everything in front of him. Even the Jade Emperor's battle techniques could be absorbed into his own knowledge. Gohan was like a dry sponge, crazily absorbing everything he saw and comprehended. Husband, get ready to take over Ching-er's body. Ching-er will only give you 10 seconds. Suddenly, I Ching's voice rang in Gohan's ears. Using I Ching's body to fight? Like this? Gohan's heart trembled, but he understood that this was the best opportunity I Ching had fought for him. Without any hesitation, he replied decisively, I'm ready. Good, I Ching said calmly. In the next second, Gohan, who was a spectator, completely took over I Ching's body. At the same time, he could more clearly sense the existence that surpassed the rules. This existence was so mysterious that Gohan couldn't understand it at all, but Gohan could continuously obtain a kind of comprehension from it. This comprehension made Gohan feel as if he could control everything in the world, including the air. He even felt as if the sky above his head was just a balloon, and the ground under his feet was just a stone that could be controlled according to his will. It was as if he had become the master of the entire heaven and earth, or rather, the entire world, or even the entire universe. With the help of this comprehension, Gohan directly used everything he had mastered, be it the 9 swords of mysterious heaven, the chaos sword technique, or even what he had learned from I Ching and the Emperor. All of them fused together without any hindrance. The fusion of these things made Gohan gradually feel as if something, or rather, a move, was waving at him. This move was the last move of the chaos sword technique that Gohan had been searching for a long time, but he still couldn't find any clues. It was also the 7th move of the chaos sword technique. Unfortunately, 10 seconds was still too short. When Gohan vaguely felt as if he had grasped something, he completely lost control of I Ching's body. Even his will directly left I Ching's body and returned to his own body outside the battlefield. Once again, he completely returned to the perspective of a spectator. At this time, the battle was nearing its end. After a few violent collisions, the Jade Emperor and Jatian Jindy both stopped attacking and stood opposite each other. The entire battlefield instantly returned to a calm state, as if the intense battle just now had never happened. This battle has probably been going on for 10,000 years. When Gohan came back to his senses, he felt as if 10,000 years had passed. However, when Gohan looked down at the system time, he was shocked to find that such an exciting battle had only passed for 2 minutes. In Gohan's mind, it was clearly more than 2 hours. My intuition can't be wrong. This battle can't have only lasted for 2 minutes. Just now, I was in Ching Er's body for more than 30 minutes. Could it be that the strength of both sides have transcended beyond time? Thinking of this, Gohan couldn't help but feel a chill down his spine. I can't believe you've also reached this realm. When the two of them separated from the battle, they both seemed to be in good condition. Their clothes were still intact, and there were no wounds on their bodies. Not even a speck of dust could be seen. It didn't seem like the two of them had gone through an intense battle. Instead, it was as if they had taken a stroll in a spring breeze. Yes, I'm here. I Ching nodded his head and admitted very readily. Are you like me? Did you kill your own true self? The Jade Emperor's face didn't show any special expression. He only asked calmly, as if they were two normal friends talking. I'm a sword wielder, and you're a cultivator. I walk on the great way of sword, but you walk on the great way of killing 3 corpses. How can I kill my real self like you? I Ching smiled. Where can I find a real self to kill? Then did you sacrifice something to reach this stage? The Jade Emperor asked again. If you ask me what I sacrificed, then I have indeed sacrificed something. I Ching nodded. But I am different from you. You sacrificed your future, while I sacrificed my past. Past? The Jade Emperor's calm face finally showed a strange expression. How should I sacrifice my past? If I sacrifice my past, is there still a path for the future? Of course there is a path for the future. I Ching nodded. Then can you still take that step? The Jade Emperor suddenly became a little excited when he heard I Ching's words. Of course. I told you, my future is still there. I Ching laughed. Is that so? I'm so envious of you. You still have the chance to take that step, unlike me. Even though I'm the Jade Emperor, I'm just a pitiful pawn in the end. The Jade Emperor sighed and silently closed his eyes. Then, a dimensional vortex slowly opened up, and the Jade Emperor's corpse was peacefully sucked into it. He's dead, except for Gohan, who vaguely felt that when the Jade Emperor and Jatian Jindy separated, it meant that the outcome of the battle was already decided. The rest of the people thought that this was just an intermission between the two of them. It was not until the Jade Emperor's dimensional vortex appeared that everyone suddenly realized that when the two of them separated, their fates were already decided. No wonder the Jade Emperor could be so calm and peaceful just now. It turned out that the Jade Emperor already knew that he was going to die, so he completely let go of a lot of things and became calm and peaceful. As the saying goes, when a man is about to die, his words are kind. This was the truth. With the death of the Jade Emperor, the battle with the Heavenly Court was completely over. Seeing that their only support was gone, the other 4 celestial emperors of the Heavenly Court knew that there was absolutely no possibility of reconciliation between themselves and the 6 great sages of Yuan Ko and the extremely terrifying I Ching. Moreover, they did not want to live in such humiliation. Therefore, After the death of the Jade Emperor, the remaining 4 celestial emperors looked at each other and chose to self-destruct at the same time. Then, their remnant souls slowly floated to various places in the world, just like the 6 great sages. If someone regained the 3 treasures of heaven and earth, they might be able to resurrect the 4 celestial emperors. As for the Jade Emperor, he had already returned to the dimensional vortex, and there was absolutely no possibility of him being resurrected. Aren't you going to stop these remnant souls? Seeing that the 6 great sages watched the 4 remnant souls of the celestial emperors leave indifferently, Liu Ling asked curiously. There's no need for that. Heaven's equal Jindy shook his head, then looked at the other 4 great sages around him, and said coldly, the alliance between the 6 of us has ended, and the structure of this world has returned to the era 800 years ago. The opponents of us humans have become these Yuan Ko, who have broken through dimensions from all directions. Liu Ling choked a little and said with some surprise, but just now, you were comrades fighting side by side. Not anymore. Heaven's equal Jindy shook his head. But don't worry, we won't be fighting for a while. We should Tian Jindy around. Even if these Yuan Ko have 10,000 guts, they will not dare to have any ideas on us humans. We also don't have the time to find trouble with these Yuan Ko now. We just want to save the remaining humans from the brainwashing of the heavenly court and then rebuild our human civilization. So, at least in these 10 years, we can still maintain a relatively peaceful state. Only our disciples know what will happen after that. Heaven's equal Jindy side. Is it because of I Ching's deterrence? Speaking of which, what realm and level did they enter in the end? It feels like the battle between I Ching and the Jade Emperor is beyond my understanding. Liu Ling sighed and wanted to search for I Ching's figure in the sky, but she saw nothing except the blue sky. When Liu Ling planned to search for Gahan, she found that Gahan had also disappeared. This lecherous bastard, how dare he say that he likes me? Liu Ling muttered with extreme dissatisfaction. She knew that at this time, Gahan was most likely flirting with I Ching, but Liu Ling did not want to disturb these two. After all, there is no need for Liu Ling to be jealous of a guy who had been dead for more than 700 years. Chapter 1341. What's going on with this dungeon? Tell me the truth. Are you playing tricks behind the scenes? Gahan and I Ching passed through the void and arrived on an island in the middle of a peaceful ocean. It was peaceful and warm here. The sea breeze was blowing, and the trees were lush. Birds were chirping, and flowers were fragrant. It was a perfect island for a vacation. I Ching had taken the initiative to bring Gahan here. As soon as the battle ended, I Ching brought Gahan to this beautiful island to spend time with the two of them. What did you say, husband? I Ching doesn't understand? I Ching blinked innocently, as if she didn't know anything. You don't have to hide it from me. I've always felt that this dungeon is very strange. All the mission prompts changed without warning. When we fought against the Heavenly Court at the end, there wasn't even a mission prompt. I'm afraid this isn't a proper dungeon. Gahan said calmly. It's more like someone deliberately manipulated a game, but she forgot to give out the mission prompt. Annoying. Husband, you're so smart. You're going to lose a lot of sisters in the future, I Ching said with a smile. She didn't have the domineering air she had when she killed the Jade Emperor. She had returned to being a little girl. What's going on? How much longer are you going to hide it from me? Gahan sighed and looked into I Ching's eyes. I never planned to hide it from you. Since you want to know, then I'll tell you. I Ching squinted her eyes and said, My husband, you're right. Chinger is indeed the mastermind behind all of this. Although Zhou Yu is beyond Ching Er's expectations, he is just a tool that Ching Er has raised. In fact, everything is under Ching Er's control. That Zhou Yu is really indulged by you. Gahan smiled bitterly. He hesitated for a moment before saying, If I'm not wrong, that creature's brain is actually your brain. Actually, the control of this brain has always been in your hands. That Zhou Yu is just an arrogant fool that you indulged. Husband, why are you so smart? I Ching rolled her eyes at Gahan and nodded. That's right. Just as outsiders know, the entire BAT project was built by me, and the vital biological brain of the entire BAT project was constructed from half of Ching, Er's brain, and half of her soul. This biological brain has always been controlled by Ching Er. The Ching you saw in the dungeon was actually arranged and planned by Ching. No wonder Tomono Kakaze couldn't control you at all and couldn't find any clues. At first, I was really naive to think that you had set up some background program to remove all traces. Now it seems that you did it yourself. No wonder Tomono Kakaze was so pitiful because of you. Gohan laughed. Is my husband protesting for little sister Tomono Kakaze? I Ching said with a face full of grievance. Of course not. Gohan shook his head. Without your help, I wouldn't be where I am now. Why would I blame you? Even if you blame me, Ching-er won't hate you. Ching-er owes you everything. Ching-er said, leaning half of her body into Gohan's arms. She said faintly, but my husband, there's one thing you haven't guessed. This biological brain was not only cultivated with half of Ching-er's brain cells, but also about 1% of it is your brain cells. What? Hearing this, Gahan's body couldn't help but tremble. It seemed that Gahan had never thought of this. How could Gahan imagine that the huge and somewhat ugly biological brain he saw in reality had 1% of his own cells in it? Husband, have you forgotten? Why were you able to achieve 100 quarks of acquired sword essence in just a few days? I Ching said with a pout. At the same time, she kept groping around Gahan's waist with her little hand. It's the sword essence oral solution, Gahan said in a daze. Ever since he entered the Shanghai Pass fortress, Gahan had almost forgotten about the sword essence oral solution. Although the sword essence oral solution could quickly increase the acquired sword essence in his body, Gahan still faintly rejected it. The magical effect of the sword essence oral solution was something that Gahan couldn't understand. Gahan was also worried that the acquired sword essence due to the sword essence oral solution would become a problem for him in the future. Therefore, after Gahan became a famed sword wielder, he completely gave up on the sword essence oral solution. Anyway, it was not difficult for Gahan to fight for sword essence in reality, so Gahan really didn't need to improve his sword essence in the game. However, when Gahan heard from I Ching that 1% of the cells in the biological brain belonged to him, Gahan vaguely understood why the sword essence oral solution had such a magical effect. Soon, I Ching confirmed his conjecture. It seems like you've thought it through, darling. That's right. What you consumed wasn't some sword essence oral liquid at all. Instead, it was the sword essence stored in your brain cells. When you entered the game, these brain cells automatically transferred the sword essence contained in their bodies to your soul. Then, they followed your soul and returned to your body. This living creature's brain is actually like a bank. Back then, you stored some sword essences in this bank, and now you've taken them out again. Therefore, you can use these acquired sword essences without worry, because they originally belonged to you, my husband. After I Ching finished speaking, the huge foreshadowing and huge pit on Gahan finally came to an end. In other words, this is my future self handing over the sword essence in my body to my past self? Gahan said with a grin. This was something that Gahan had never thought of. So, this dungeon was actually designed by you as well? But why did you go through so much trouble to design this dungeon? Gahan asked again. Because this is the last gift that I can give you, darling. I Ching said gently. The road ahead seems long, but in fact, it's imminent. Darling, you don't have much time left. If you can master the power of the way of heaven before the last moment, you will eventually fall into a tragic fate, and this world will never be able to welcome peace. However, it's too difficult to understand the power of the way of heaven with your own strength. Even the 6 sages in the past had a clear understanding of the way of heaven after thousands of years, and they became sages. I Ching believes that if you give me thousands of years, no, as long as you have 10,000 years, I believe that you can understand the existence of the way of heaven. However, darling, you can't have that much time, so I can only help you cheat and open a door for you. so that you can see a trace of the way of heaven through the crack of the door. This way, we still have a chance of survival. I Ching said with a little worry. I see. That's why you let my consciousness enter your body. Moreover, I did feel that mysterious power. Is that power called the way of heaven? Gohan said with a little disappointment. Now that he recalled the power of the way of heaven that he had once controlled, he felt extremely excited. He wanted to feel that power again. It was a power that was as tempting as a drug. Once he tasted the feeling of the power of the way of heaven, all the desires in the world seemed to be insignificant compared to the power of the way of heaven. For the rest of Gohan's life, the power of the way of heaven was the biggest pursuit. Yes, darling, that is the power of the way of heaven. I Ching nodded. Ching Er, since you can use the power of the way of heaven, does that mean that you have broken through the limit of an Emperor Sword wielder and entered the legendary realm that surpasses an Emperor's Sword? At the mention of the way of heaven, Gohan instinctively thought of this question. After flipping through all the information and documents in the past 1,000 years, even the unparalleled Kenzu's power was only at the limit of an Emperor Sword wielder. Gohan had never seen the words realm of the way of heaven in any of the documents. Could it be that Jitian Jiandi had hidden it so deeply? No. How could Ching Er be able to control the power of the way of heaven? If Ching Er could really control the power of the way of heaven, Ching Er wouldn't have gone to another world in the end. I Ching smiled bitterly. Just now, whether it was the Jade Emperor or Ching Er herself, they had only opened up a part of the way of heaven. At most, they could only be considered to have taken one step. If they wanted to put another foot into the door of the way of heaven, it would be extremely difficult. Ching, what exactly is the power system above the Sword Emperor? Tell me about it. I Ching's words caused Gohan to feel a wave of confusion, and he couldn't help but ask. There is indeed a realm above Jiandi, and that is the Sage. The supreme power in the world is called the Way. The Way is divided into the Way of Heaven and the Great Way. The Great Way can only be pursued and cannot be described. It is a power that can never be controlled. The Way of Heaven is the projection of the Great Way in this world. It is also the supreme power that living things can control. The so-called Sage can control and use the power of the Way of Heaven. However, at the same time, the Sage will become a chess piece of the Way of Heaven and be restricted by the Way of Heaven. It's funny to think about it. The biggest dream of all living things in the world is to become a chess piece of the Way of Heaven. As for the Jade Emperor and I, to give you an example, we only have the phone number of the Way of Heaven. We can get in touch with the Way of Heaven and receive a little bit of charity from the Way of Heaven. That's all. When facing a sage who can use the power of the Way of Heaven freely, we are far inferior. Is that so? Hearing this, Gohan was excited. If he could reach such a terrifying level with just a little bit of power, if he really became a sage, how powerful would he be? When he thought that sect leader Tantian was such a powerful sage, Gohan's heart skipped a beat. In the face of such an opponent, all of Gohan's confidence disappeared. Chapter 1342. Husband, don't worry. Ching Er believes that husband will definitely be able to save himself, save us, and save the fate of the entire world. Ching Er smiled. Now that the husband has sensed the power of the heavenly way, in the future, when you can communicate with the heavenly way in reality, you will have a chance to become a sage. Husband, if you can grasp this opportunity, you will definitely be able to break through. All right, I've thought through most of the things. However, there's one thing that I don't understand. Why did you nurture Zhou? Zhou's existence is completely unnecessary. You could have just destroyed his soul fragment the moment his soul entered the creature's brain. It wouldn't have affected your plan at all. Moreover, what's the point of this Emperor's Sword instance dungeon? Why didn't you just arrange a single-player instance dungeon for me? Why did you drag so many people into this? This is completely unnecessary. Gohan frowned as he asked. This was something that Gohan did not understand. Hearing Gohan's question, I Ching suddenly became hesitant. There was a rare, conflicted expression on his face. He did not answer Gohan's question for a long time. This was completely different from the I Ching who had told him everything he knew. Is there something that you don't want me to know? Through the change in I Ching's expression, Gahan acutely realized that there might not be a simple reason behind this question. There might even be something that Gahan did not expect. Husband, it's better that you don't know about this. Let Ching bear all of this alone. I Ching suddenly stood up from Gahan's body and said firmly, "You're not willing to tell me. This means that there's something shameful here." Gahan's expression changed. After a moment of silence, he said, "If you're not willing to tell me, I'll make a guess myself. It doesn't matter if it's Zhou Yu or the Emperor's Sword level instance dungeon that has trapped millions of souls. They're actually not necessary. However, you insisted on adding them into the instance dungeon. This means that their existence is necessary. Or rather, it can't be done without them. If what you've told me before is the truth, then your goal this time is to let me feel the power of the heavenly Tao in advance and open that door for me to move forward. The souls of Zhou Yu and these people are the key to achieving this goal. Because I've experienced the power of the heavenly axiom, I already know that it's a form of power that transcends all known human powers. I don't think a mere biological brain and a virtual game system can simulate such power. Otherwise, why didn't you give the previous Emperor Sword wielders such an experience? Even if the average Emperor Sword wielder could not reach my level of talent, there was no harm in trying. What if there was an exception? After all, there's nothing to lose from the game. Or is it that there's a huge price to pay for me to experience the heavenly axiom, a price that the entire human society cannot afford a second time? Husband, I Ching took a few steps back weakly and sat on the beach. There was helplessness, fear, and pain in her eyes. Husband, why do you have to be so smart? It seems like I've guessed correctly. Guhan's initially smiling face suddenly turned pale. The price for me to feel the power of the heavenly axiom is the souls of these millions of people. As he said that, Gahan took a step closer to I Ching. Do you need to exhaust the souls of these millions of people in exchange for 10 seconds of communication with the heavenly axiom? I Ching did not speak. She only lowered her head. However, her silence explained everything. At this point, the truth about the instance dungeon was finally clear. This instance dungeon had been I Ching's plan from the beginning to the end. Her goal was to exhaust the souls of these millions of people so that Guhan could feel the power of the heavenly axiom for around 10 seconds. Initially, I Ching might have wanted to find some other excuse to achieve this goal. However, Zhou Yu's appearance had undoubtedly given I Ching an excellent shield. Zhou Yu had trapped all the souls in the game. In this process, there would be 1 or 2 instance dungeon mutations and the consumption of millions of human souls. This became a very normal thing. No one would suspect that this matter had anything to do with I Ching, who had died 700 years ago. No one would suspect that this matter had anything to do with Gahan, who had bravely entered the instance dungeon in hopes of saving everyone. Everything had become a pure accident. Gahan was still a hero. Those souls who had died were just unlucky people. How many souls were sacrificed this time? How many souls can survive? Guhan did not reprimand I Ching. Instead, he asked in a calm and direct manner. There are a total of 26 million souls trapped in this instance dungeon. About 2 million souls have completely dissipated. The remaining 26 million souls have been severely depleted. A large portion of them might suffer from serious mental illness when they return to their bodies. Some might even have their lifespan reduced by a year or even a few decades, I Ching said with her head lowered. What about the souls of the sword bearers? What happened to their souls? Guhan asked again. I've only extracted about half of their soul energy. Their lives and mental state should be able to recover very quickly. However, their lifespan might be reduced by around 10 years. I Ching answered. Then, Songhama is husband's good friend. Of course, Chinger knows what's important. Songhama's soul is safe and sound. There's also Ojin's soul and Mingyue's soul. Chinger has purposely avoided the souls of everyone who has interacted with husband. They'll be fine, I Ching replied. Sigh. Gahan let out a long sigh. It was unknown whether this sigh was a happy sigh or a sad one. The two of them fell into silence again. I Ching could not help but ask Gahan, "Husband, will you hate Ching from now on? Will you think of Ching as a cruel and terrifying woman?" When I Ching asked this question, she was like a mortal waiting to be judged. If Guhan answered yes, "You are indeed a cruel and terrifying woman," Guhan's answer caused I Ching's breath to become stuck in her throat. "But so what if I'm cruel and terrifying? In the end, you still did this for me. I'm not the kind of man who can't see the situation clearly. I only seek forgiveness and purity in my heart." Guhan paused. "Although I didn't know your plan from the beginning, and although I would have stopped you after knowing your plan, there's one thing that can't be changed. You didn't do this for yourself, but for me. I'm the main culprit behind everything." "That's not it, husband. All of this was Ching own decision. All of this has nothing to do with husband. Husband, please don't say such things." When I Ching heard Guhan's words, she immediately became anxious. "I haven't finished speaking." Guhan helped I Ching up from the beach. "Do you think I'm the kind of useless person who regrets my past mistakes and blames myself for the rest of my life? Since it's already happened, it's meaningless to feel guilty and regret. The only way is to make the sacrifice of these souls worthwhile. I'm no longer alone. I'm shouldering the souls of 2 million people. I won't let their sacrifice be meaningless. I'll definitely make their sacrifice worthwhile, although they may not be willing to make such a sacrifice. Husband, don't worry. I won't blame you, and I won't hate you. You're my woman." At this point, Gohan suddenly hugged I Ching in his arms. He lowered his head and kissed I Ching's lips. "Husband." I Ching could no longer control her emotions. Tears flowed down from the corners of her eyes like a waterfall. She hugged Gohan passionately, letting every inch of her skin stick closely to Gahan. The moment the two of them touched each other, I Ching snapped her fingers. Their clothes disappeared without a trace, and they hugged each other naked. "Husband, Chinger wants it." I Ching moaned. "Okay." Gahan didn't refuse. He immediately got on top of her. Due to well-known reasons, what happened next couldn't be described. This was probably the most complicated sex experience in Gahan's life. To have sex with the souls of 2 million people on his back was an unimaginable experience for both his mind and body. After a few rounds of indulgence, the two of them finally separated once more. Guhan held I Ching in his arms, and at the same time, gently caressed every inch of I Ching's skin. The ticklish feeling of Guhan's fingers brushing across her skin caused I Ching's body to tremble uncontrollably. "So beautiful, just like a piece of silk." Guhan praised sincerely. "Husband, if you like it. Ching, there will be a brocade quilt for you every day in the future." I Ching moaned. "When will it be in the future? Why become a sage?" Gohan sighed. There was a hint of sadness in his tone. "Will I still be able to see you in the game in the future?" "Husband, you don't have to say any more. I know you. You're definitely not a selfish woman. If you really sacrifice the souls of 2 million people for nothing, I'm afraid you wouldn't have the courage to have a night of pleasure with me." A bitter smile appeared on Guhan's face. "Within those 2 million souls, does that include your soul?" "Husband, why do you have to be so smart? Chinger can't even sneak away." I Ching smiled sadly, and her figure gradually faded. Chapter 1343. Dear viewers, the Sword Maiden online incident that everyone is concerned about has finally come to an end. The last batch of 162 million people who were trapped in the game have woken up from their dreams. Unfortunately, because they were trapped in the game for too long, 2 million of their compatriots have left forever. This is a moment worthy of a moment of silence for all our compatriots. According to the proposal of the Sword Committee, the 8 base cities will hold a 3-day mourning ceremony to mourn for the compatriots who died in Sword Maiden Online. All the members of the Sword Committee and the Council of the base cities will attend this mourning event. His Majesty Jindi will give a speech during this mourning event, encouraging those who survived to put aside their grief and move forward. In 10 minutes, we will replay the interview with His Majesty Gahan. In the interview, His Majesty Sea Emperor will tell you in detail the story of how he defeated Yuan Ko and Zhou Yu and rescued all mankind. In this interview, His Majesty Sea Emperor will tell you in detail how he deceived Zhou Yu's trust and finally succeeded in drawing Zhou Yu's soul out of the living brain. Finally, His Majesty Sea Emperor brought his beloved disciple and Miss Liunian Ling into the dangerous game world together to save the souls of 2 million people who were trapped. As for the question of whether Sword Maiden Online can be restarted, the experts of the Sword Committee are conducting a re-evaluation of the creature's brain. After confirming that there are no hidden souls in it, a referendum will be held to decide whether Sword Maiden Online should be restarted. That's all the latest news about this incident. For more news, you can follow our official Weibo and WeChat account and watch the replay of His Majesty Sea Emperor's interview below. In a restaurant, the TV station was rolling the news about the Sword Maiden Online incident, because this was big news that affected every human being and caused the death of more than 2 million people. The heat of this news had completely overshadowed the heat of Sea Emperor's ascension to the throne. It had become the hottest news on every TV station. Thanks to His Majesty Sea Emperor. If it weren't for him, my butt face would have died in the game forever. An old man said to his friend while watching the news at the table. Yeah, I watched that interview 3 times. His Majesty, the Sea King, had a hard time. This time, the tens of millions of people were able to escape from death, and it was all because of His Majesty, the Sea King. This old man doesn't have anything good except for 3 bottles of Red Star Ergo 2 that I hid when my son was born. It's been more than 30 years. I want to give these 3 bottles to His Majesty the Sea Emperor as a token of my appreciation. After all, my son's life was saved by His Majesty the Sea Emperor. Come on. How could His Majesty the Sea Emperor accept your lousy 3rd-grade wine? The other man rolled his eyes. However, this time, His Majesty the Ocean Emperor has indeed worked hard and performed a great service. He is our great benefactor. Sigh, 2 of my 3 sons could not hold on and died in that whatever instance dungeon. Thanks to His Majesty the Sea Emperor, my last youngest son was saved. Although he became a little stupid, at least his life was saved. My old chief family is not extinct. At this point, a few turbid tears flowed from the corners of the old man's eyes. Come, let us propose a toast to His Majesty the Sea God. That's right. Together, let us propose a toast to His Majesty the Sea Emperor. The 2 old men clinked their wine glasses and wished His Majesty the Sea Emperor a long life. Then they gulped down the white wine in their glasses. Just as the 2 of them were feeling emotional, an extremely loud noise suddenly came from the street outside the restaurant. It sounded like there were at least a few thousand people talking. Everyone was shouting slogans in unison. After listening carefully, they found that the slogans were all like this. Gohan is not a hero. He is a murderer. That evil thief Gohan killed tens of thousands of people in Yanjing City. He killed our loved ones. The blood of tens of thousands of people cannot be shed in vain. The bright blue sky cannot be covered. A life for a life is a matter of course. 1 sword from Gohan, 10,000 people cry. As long as Gohan is not dead, the demonstration will not stop. Through the glass windows of the restaurant, they could see a large group of people carrying various kinds of signs walking through the street. They shouted slogans in unison, demanding the government to punish Gohan and avenge their dead loved ones. What the hell is going on? Isn't Gohan His Majesty the Sea Emperor? What did His Majesty do wrong? Why are they doing this? Hearing the slogans outside, an old man couldn't help but angrily ask, isn't it because he wanted to trick Zhou Yu out of the brain? His Majesty the Sea Emperor had no choice but to endure the pain in his heart and kill tens of thousands of people. Otherwise, how could that extremely cunning Zhou Yu believe that His Majesty the Sea Emperor had left Yanjing City and escaped from the brain? His Majesty the Sea Emperor was forced to do this. So that's how it is. The old man nodded. Then I also heard that His Majesty the Sea Emperor only cut off a portion of their limbs in order to minimize injuries. It looks bloody, But in fact, as long as they are placed in the medical bay in time, there will be no problem. But His Majesty the Sea Emperor is not a god after all. How could his sword be just right? It's inevitable that he doesn't kill people. How can these people be so ignorant and unreasonable? His Majesty the Sea Emperor had to make a choice for the majority of people. Since His Majesty the Sea Emperor can make such a sacrifice, why can't they do the same? Actually, I heard that the compensation work between the families and the government was not done well. The government was only willing to pay 200,000 renminbi per person, but the families insisted on 1 million renminbi per life. Of course, the government would not agree. After 2 or 3 days of negotiation, these people gathered together and started to cause trouble. An old man said, 200,000 renminbi? What else do they have to say? Didn't my 2 sons only pay that much? This old man thinks it's very fair, but they still have to say something. The old man whose 2 sons died was so angry that his face turned red. Everyone should talk about fairness. Why do they dare to ask for compensation of 1 million renminbi? If the government really pays that much, we'll go and cause trouble too. Yes, yes. The 2 old men repeatedly said yes. They drank a glass of wine and began to denounce the people who were protesting outside. They did not know how to sacrifice for humanity and only cared about their own families and did not care about the overall situation of humanity. Just as the protesting group was halfway through, police sirens suddenly sounded. Countless police officers rushed out from all directions and surrounded the protesting group. Then, a police leader stood on a high place and used a loudspeaker to explain to the protesting group, hoping that the families would forgive and understand His Majesty the Sea Emperor and voluntarily leave. How could those angry families listen to the police leader's words? They shouted their slogans and began to attack the line of defense formed by the police. They wanted to rush to the hotel that Gahan was temporarily staying at to find Gahan and settle accounts with him. Do it! The police chief, who had already received the order from above, did not hesitate. Countless police officers waved the baseball bat-like electric batons in their hands and began to hit the families. These electric batons carried a strong electric current. Once hit by the electric batons, the person would immediately fall into a state of numbness and would not be able to resist at all. The defenseless family members were no match for the police. In just a short while, they were all knocked out by the electric batons. Then, they were thrown onto the hover trucks and dragged into the police station like pigs. Well done! Well done! How dare they slander His Majesty the Sea Emperor? Not bad. How dare they ask for compensation of 1 million renminbi? F***CK them. The diners in the hotel applauded and cheered when they saw the decisive action of the police. Later, under the education of the police station, most of the families honestly admitted their mistakes, expressed that they understood His Majesty Guhan's painstaking efforts, and were willing to accept the government compensation of 200,000 renminbi. Of course, there were also some relatives who did not care about money. They expressed that they did not want any compensation, as long as Gahan paid with his life. In the end, these family members never came out of the police station. These family members wanted to seek support and sympathy from the society through the media. In the end, because most of the people were saved because of Gahan, not only did they not sympathize with these family members who were arrested, but they also scolded these family members on the internet and in real life for not knowing what was good for them. They only wanted high compensation and did not know what was good for humanity. With the voices of the entire society being divided under the suppression of such forceful methods, the social fluctuations quickly calmed down. After waiting for 3 to 4 years, no one remembered that 20 to 30,000 people had died in the hands of Gahan. After another few decades, the memorial and mourning activities for this incident also fell into a low tide. When the family members of the victims died, this incident was almost completely forgotten, and it did not affect the illustrious reputation of the great His Majesty Gahan in the future. If they knew that you deliberately killed those tens of thousands of people, and that as long as you had kindness in your heart, those people could have survived, would they still support you like now? Seeing the story that happened in the restaurant, A man wearing sunglasses and a robe sitting at the corner of the table asked the man wearing the same robe and sunglasses sitting opposite him. I don't know. Guhan shook his head and sneered. But even if they know, what can they do? They still need to thank me for saving their lives, right? I see, Xian said expressionlessly. When I first heard your story, I thought you were a good person. Now it seems I was wrong. So you think I am a bad person? Guhan asked with a smile. No. Xian shook his head and said solemnly, you are a great man. Chapter 1344. Today was the third day since Gahan left the dungeon. In these 3 days, Gahan had been dealing with all kinds of aftermath. This included his first interview with the television media in his life, where he described the entire incident in detail. Coupled with the various videos he had recorded at the time, he successfully cleared his name and turned from a murderer to a savior of mankind. Guhan even took the initiative to comfort the families of the dead and injured. He gave a large sum of money to the parents of those who lost their loved ones. Guhan only gave the money to the parents of those who died trapped in the dungeon. As for the relatives of those who were killed by Gahan during the demonstrations, Gahan did not even show his face. He treated them as if they did not exist. Apart from that, perhaps out of guilt, Guhan even took out 40 billion renminbi to entrust the Lionian clan's subordinate organizations to set up a sword Maiden online dungeon survivor and family protection fund. The 40 billion renminbi would be used to protect the pitiful people who suffered from various illnesses due to the dungeon incident, as well as those who lost their loved ones. Of course, the fund would not be of any use to those who did not die in the dungeon. This became one of the reasons why the relatives of those who died protested in the streets. They felt that Gahan was too unfair. Why would Gahan compensate those who did not die in Gahan's hands, but not their loved ones who died in Gahan's hands? This was the only thing Gahan could do. After settling these matters, Guhan received Xian's invitation to meet him in this small restaurant. This restaurant's silk stockings, milk tea, and Hong Kong-style refreshments are pretty good. It's the most authentic Hong Kong-style tea house I've eaten in the past 500 years. I guarantee that if I didn't bring you here, you wouldn't be able to taste such an authentic Hong Kong-style tea house. Try it. Xian squeezed out a smile and said. Guhan ate a few mouthfuls of the dishes Xian praised. He realized the dishes were mainly light and sweet. Maybe it was delicious for some people, but it couldn't satisfy Guhan's taste. Guhan preferred to eat spicy dishes. Guhan was a bit surprised. Guhan ate a lot of spicy dishes. But out of respect for Xian and the food, Guhan still finished the food in front of him. But when Guhan finished eating, he noticed that Xian only took a small bite before pushing the food to the side. He didn't take another bite. Unexpected. The taste of the food has completely changed the second time I came here. It no longer has the authentic Hong Kong taste. Xian sighed and said, Did the restaurant change its chef? Guhan asked calmly. Maybe. Xian thought for a while. The last time I came, the owner was an old man with white hair. Now he's become a young man in his 20s. The owner must have changed. Guhan was stunned and asked again, Mr. Xian, how long has it been since you came to this restaurant? I can't remember. Xian waved his hand. Maybe 40 to 50 years. As expected, the owner of this restaurant is probably the great-grandson or even great-grandson of the previous owner. Guhan thought. He looked at Xian and said, We have eaten. Mr. Xian, can you tell me the real reason why you asked me to come here? It's nothing big. Didn't I tell you before you entered the dungeon that if you can successfully save these people, I will give you the thing Gu Xuanwu asked me to pass to you? Xian curled his lips. Now it's time for me to fulfill my promise. Although I don't think it's a good thing to pass this thing to you. Xian took out a sword case out of thin air and placed it in front of Gahan. Cactus. Gahan couldn't help but exclaim when he opened the case. Inside the case was the last of the 4 celestial banishing swords, Cactus. Isn't Cactus in the hands of the Jade Emperor? Why is it here? Looking at the genuine captive immortal sword in the sword sheath, Guhan asked in disbelief. You actually know that Cactus is in the hands of the Jade Emperor. That's strange. The Jade Emperor never mentioned this embarrassing matter to anyone. I'm afraid there's no one else in the world who knows that Captus was once in the hands of the Jade Emperor. How do you know? Xian showed a curious expression. That's right. The Jade Emperor is the Jade Emperor's. In that instance dungeon, the Jade Emperor had once used the immortal trapping sword. That is how I know about this. Guhan's answer was very sincere. The Jade Emperor in the dungeon used Captus? Xian's expression changed. He looked at Gahan suspiciously and asked, Captus is used to kill the self. In other situations, it's not as useful as the Jade Emperor's Emperor's Sword of Firmament. Why did he use Captus to fight you? Could it be that you've already forced the Jade Emperor to the point where he has to fight by killing his true self? Guhan didn't say anything else. He didn't expect Xian to know the truth. What if he said something else and Xian figured out the truth behind the deaths of the 2 million people? Others might not have the intelligence to do so, but Guhan believed Xian definitely had. All right, since you don't want to say, I won't ask. Xian smiled nonchalantly when Gahan didn't answer his question. He continued, I remembered Gu Xuanwu asked me what to do if she wanted to steal something from the Jade Emperor. She wanted me to help her plan it. I called her a lunatic. She was just a deity-level sword wielder. She wanted to steal something from the Desolation-level Yuan, co-Jade Emperor. Even I didn't dare to imagine such a thing. But after her repeated begging and pestering, I had no choice but to look through a month's worth of information. I helped her come up with a plan that only had a 1% success rate. Then Gu Xuanwu relied on this 1% success rate to steal Captus. Guhan's entire body tensed up. A plan that only had a 1% chance of success, Gu Xuanwu did it without any hesitation. Even if they were separated by 1,000 years, Guhan could still clearly feel the sincerity in his heart. No, our Miss Black Tortoise didn't think so. In the blink of an eye, she tore apart the plan that I spent a month to come up with. Then, after she became an Emperor's Sword, she made a small deal to exchange for this celestial trapping sword from the Jade Emperor. Gahan almost spat out his milk tea. Very good. This was his style as a father. How much do you know about Gu Xuanwu? What happened to her afterwards? Do you know where she was buried? Guhan looked affectionately at the sword of Captus that his daughter left for him. After a long silence, he asked Xian hesitantly. I don't know. Xian shrugged helplessly. The last time I saw her, she told me she wanted to find a way to go home to find her father. I don't understand. She was already in her 90s at that time. Her father was at least 100 years old. Even his bones should have turned to dust. What was she looking for? Is that so? Guhan's face twitched. He had endless love for his daughter. At the same time, his feelings for Kinzu, the culprit who separated him and his daughter, became more complicated. After all, Kinzu was his son-in-law. One more question. Why aren't you willing to give me Captus? You said she is a disaster to me. Why is that? Gahan asked curiously. Let me correct myself. This is not what I said. It was Gu Xuanwu who said it. She told me that there's a 99% chance that this thing is a disaster. However, there is a 1% chance that it is the key to saving the world. As for whether to give it to you, it is up to me. If I think that Gahan is a trustworthy person, then I will get it to him. Xian said. So you think I'm a trustworthy person? Gahan asked. I don't know if you are a trustworthy person, but like I said, you are a great person. Xian stood up from his chair and called for the boss to settle the bill. He patted Gahan's shoulder and said, there are still many things to do in the station. Tamono Kakazi's consciousness is still a little confused. I have a lot of things to do. I won't talk to you anymore. Oh, I almost forgot. Xian took out a small cloth bag from his dimensional pocket and gave it to Gahan. Actually, Xuanwu asked me to pass this to you. After passing the small cloth bag to Gahan, Xian left the restaurant and disappeared into the crowd on the street. Guhan took the small cloth bag and opened it. To his surprise, he found that there was a glossy green severed black hair inside. This was a treasure that had gone through most of Guhan's life since the age of 18. At this moment, it once again appeared in front of Guhan. This Gu Xuanwu, does she know about the problem I am facing now? Gahan touched the severed black hair in his hand. It was obvious that his daughter knew about the huge problem he was facing in Zifu. More than 3 years ago, in order to save Yuzhong City, Guhan had synchronized with the immortal-grade Sword Mistress Sword of Victory and temporarily transformed into an immortal-grade sword wielder. That was how he had defeated Nether River Patriarch. But this also left a huge hidden danger for Gahan. The Sword of Victory had synchronized with Gahan successfully. As long as Gahan touched the hilt of the Sword of Victory, he would immediately complete the remaining steps and become the true wielder of the Sword of Victory. But this meant that Gahan had to find a sister with the same nature for the Sword of Victory and form 2 immortal sword wielder. Otherwise, Gahan's body would collapse and he would die within a month. But the Sword of Victory had always been a sword mistress. How could Gahan find a sword mistress for the Sword of Victory? Originally, Gahan planned to put this problem aside for the time being. But now that Immortal Cactus and Immortal Culling Sword had both appeared in front of Gahan, Gahan's immortal sword wielder had a better choice. That was to gather all 4 immortal banishing swords. But if all 4 immortal banishing swords were gathered, the Sword of Victory would definitely become a huge problem for Gahan. And there was only one way to solve this problem. That was to use the severed black hair to cut off the mark between himself and the Sword of Victory. This was the choice Gahan had to face now. Chapter 1345. Gahan wasn't someone who would hesitate in the face of a decision. After obtaining green silk and confirming that it was almost impossible for him to find a suitable sword maiden for the Victory Sword, Gahan made a firm decision to break up with the Victory Sword. In reality, Gahan and the Victory Sword never had any deep feelings for each other. Gahan had never even spoken a word to the Victory Sword, which was completely different from the Juzi Sword. Back then, the Juzi Sword was already Gahan's famed sword maiden, and it had been guarding by Gahan's side for a month or 2. Even if Gahan himself was somewhat resistant, he had already established a certain relationship with Gahan. Using green silk to cut off the Juzi Sword made Gahan feel some reluctance and shame. But for the Victory Sword, this reluctance and shame were much weaker. Moreover, when it came to matters related to his future, Gahan never hesitated. The souls of 2 million people have already fallen on my shoulders. How could I be reluctant to part with the Victory Sword? After returning to the hotel, Gahan took a deep breath, took out the green silk that was left for him by the black tortoise, and pierced it into his abdomen. It was as if the green silk beheader had pierced into the surface of the water. It lightly pierced into Guhan's abdomen, and then easily entered Guhan's Zifu. However, it did not leave even the slightest scar on Guhan's skin, nor did it make Guhan feel any pain. A threat. A huge threat. At the same time, all of Gahan's sword maidens felt their hair stand on end. They instinctively felt a huge threat approaching them, a threat that could separate them from their current situation. As a result, these sword maidens didn't say anything and returned to their swords, returning to Gahan's scabbard. At the same time, their consciousness returned to Flowing Maple's purple palace and their own sword marks. When these sword maidens opened their eyes and saw the situation inside the purple palace, they were surprised to find that there was a small green fish that seemed to be alive, constantly swimming in Gahan's purple palace. It seemed to be looking for something. What is this? It looks so scary. Qijian screamed as soon as she saw the green fish. She realized that all the threats she felt were coming from this green fish. It looks fun. Is this fish edible? Qing Pin was indeed an authentic foodie. The moment he saw the green fish, he asked if it was edible. She had completely forgotten that she had almost been separated from Gahan because of this green fish. Shi Shui didn't say anything, and no one noticed her either. However, her reaction was the biggest. The entire sword scar was trembling uncontrollably. This thing looks a little familiar. Etian was not as panicked as she was. She said calmly, "Idiot Etian, look at what stuck to our butts." Doyu's angry voice was heard. Both of them looked at the hilt of their swords that were stuck together by a lump of green stuff. After a few seconds of silence, they exclaimed at the same time, green silk slash. It turned out that Gohan's decision was too decisive. Before he used green silk severing, he didn't inform any of the sword maidens about it. Gohan actually used green silk severing? Does he not want me anymore? Chi Jian let out a sorrowful wail. She immediately felt that Gohan was going to use sever green silk to cut off her sword mark. Come on, even if Gohan killed all of us, he wouldn't bear to kill you. After all, there's only you and... Etienne didn't even finish her sentence before she was interrupted by Doyu's loud wails. Ugh, Gohan must think that the relationship between siblings is too intimate. That's why he wants to separate from Doyu. What nonsense are you thinking, Doyu? If you were to be cut off, wouldn't I be as unlucky as you? Etienne said angrily. Aya. Anyway, Gohan could cut off anyone but us sisters. Us sisters aren't something that little girls like you can compare to. Extinguish Immortal Sword said proudly from the side. However, if she was really so sure, why would she say such a thing? You guys don't need to guess anymore. Gohan definitely wants to cut off my sword scar. A faint voice rang out. Most of the sword ladies were joking. None of them really thought that Gohan would kill their sword scar. However, the owner of the voice was really gloomy and resentful. She felt that the one who would be killed would be her. Hearing this voice, all the sword ladies suddenly fell silent. They knew that if Gohan really wanted to kick that sword lady out, then that sword lady would definitely be the past water sword, because the past water sword was an anomaly among all the sword ladies. She seemed to be drifting away from Gohan and the sword ladies. She clearly had such an intimate relationship with Gohan, but she was so lonely. She didn't even have a sword lady that could be called a friend. Look, that fish is heading towards that corner. Juzi's sword scar suddenly pointed at green silk severing sword. Everyone realized that green silk severing sword had already passed their sword scar and was flying towards the quietest corner of the Zifu. What's there? There's nothing there. Why is it going there? Doyu asked in confusion. No, it's not that there's nothing there. Don't forget, there's still a sword scar there. Etienne said meaningfully. All the sword ladies immediately followed behind green silk severing sword and chased after it. Finally, when green silk severing sword stopped, an extremely illusory sword scar that looked like mist appeared in front of them. At the same time, under the gaze of all the sword ladies, green silk severing sword began to wrap around the tip of the sword scar. Just like a crossword game played by kindergarten children, green silk severing sword would start from the tip of the sword and color the sword scar. The so-called color painting was actually to dye the gas that formed the sword mark green. Once the entire sword mark turned green, then the sword mark would completely melt like ice and snow, disappearing into the cold purple palace. Green silk severing sword was like a crayon that was covered with a virus. Once the virus destroyed the entire sword scar, the sword scar would completely die, without any obstruction. The moment green silk severing sword came into contact with the victory sword scar, it successfully left a green mark on the sword scar. This meant that the victory sword's sword scar was gradually being corroded by green silk severing sword virus. Then, it would face the tragedy of the sword scar melting. The victory sword was not as magical as the Qingpin sword. With the power of the Qingping sword, it eventually devoured green silk severing sword. The green silk severing sword was covered in green along the victory sword scar. The entire sword scar began to slowly melt and finally turned into white mist, completely disappearing from Gohan's Zifu. Gone just like that. Shui said dejectedly. Her tone was filled with helplessness, as if she could see her own future. The victory sword is so pitiful. She didn't even see us once before she parted ways. Doyu also said, with some disappointment, "Ha, there's nothing we can do about it. In order to make room for our two younger sisters, it's only right for her to sacrifice herself." Ha. Celestial Extinguishing Sword covered his mouth and laughed. Etienne snorted disdainfully when he saw Celestial Extinguishing Sword's arrogance. It was obvious that he was very unhappy with Celestial Extinguishing Sword's attitude. The atmosphere in the Zifu also became somewhat gloomy. Hey, everyone, don't be sad. The victory sword and Gohan were not meant to be together. Moreover, she and Gohan don't have any feelings for each other. To her, this is just a small dream. There's nothing to see here. Let's go back outside. Right now, Gohan must not be feeling good. Let's go and accompany him. Chi said to smooth things over. Chi could already feel that the atmosphere in the Zifu was not good. Staying here was not good for anyone. It was better to leave as soon as possible. The group of sword ladies didn't say anything. They just left the Zifu one after another. Then, they automatically released their sword lady forms and uniformly rushed to surround Gohan's side. You guys, haven't you caused enough trouble in my Zifu? Do you still want to come out and cause trouble? At this time, Gohan had also come out of his meditative state. He looked at the sword ladies beside Shui and said indifferently, "Military governor." You've really... Chi was halfway through its sentence when Gohan nodded and answered, "Yes, I've already cut off the victory sword scar. You've seen the process yourself. What's there to doubt?" Chi still looked like it wanted to say something. "Hey." Gohan sighed and patted Chi shoulder. "I know what you mean. You saw the victory sword scar melt, so you felt the same way. You're afraid that one day, your sword scar will also be cut off, right?" "Yes." Chi nodded honestly. "Actually, it's not just you. Everyone else has the same worries, right?" Gohan raised his head and looked at the eyes of every sword lady in front of him. Then, he took a deep breath and pulled out Shui, who had been hiding in the scabbard. He released her by force and let all the 8 sword ladies stand in front of him. He raised his hand and swore solemnly, "I, Gohan, swear to my own heart that even if I, Gohan, die, I will never leave any of you, including you." Shui. Gohan added one last sentence to Shui. Actually, the conversation of these sword ladies in the Fu didn't escape Gohan's ears. It was just that Gohan didn't say anything at that time. Yes, all the sword ladies, including Shui, nodded. The gloominess in their hearts disappeared in an instant. "Right, Celestial Juetian, Celestial Zhu, I just got your sister's Celestial Captus today. Looks like she's already a Celestial Sword Lady." Gohan thought of something and wanted to take out the sword case Xian just gave him from the dimensional pocket. The moment his mental power touched the dimensional pocket, Gohan felt dizzy. In a moment of carelessness, other than the sword case, another sword case fell out of the dimensional pocket together with the sword case. The 2 sword cases fell on the ground. The huge impact caused the lids of the 2 sword cases to open at the same time. 2 sword ladies fell out of the sword cases. Sigh. I didn't expect controlling green silk would consume so much mental power. It's messing up my thoughts. Gohan touched his forehead and smiled bitterly. He then bent down and picked up the 2 sword ladies that fell on the ground. Gohan looked at the 2 sword ladies. Yes, Celestial Captus in the left hand and Victory Sword in the right. Chapter 1346. This was probably the stupidest mistake Gohan had ever made in his life. After using up the severed black hair that his daughter had given him, he had successfully severed the Victory Sword scar. Due to the huge consumption of his mental power, Gohan, who was in a daze, had forgotten one important thing. When he had enough sword essence, there was a possibility that he could synchronize the Sword Maiden with the Sword Maiden in his hand. Most sword wielders would not have such a problem. Or rather, their real problem was that the Sword Maiden did not react at all when they held in their hands. If they could synchronize the Sword Maiden with the Sword Maiden in their hands, it would be a great fortune for them. However, things were different for Gohan, especially since the Victory Sword had synchronized with Gohan once before. Therefore, when Gohan held the Victory Sword in his hands once again, something unexpected happened. Gohan's body began to petrify rapidly, and in the end, he turned into a stone statue. Gohan. This scene shocked all the Sword Maidens present. They stared dumbly at the petrified Gohan. After a while, Doyu asked weakly, "Big sisters, what's wrong with Big Brother? Is there even need to look? He's petrified." Etion rolled her eyes. To be more precise, Gohan has entered a synchronized state. Zhu Xian rubbed her nose and said with a pained expression, "What's going on?" Qi Dian's face was full of distress and helplessness. Hubby finally severed the victory sword scar and won his future freedom. Why is he trapped again? Sister Qi Dian, take a look and see which sword Maiden coordinated with Guhan. Qing Popper jumped out and asked with his eyes wide open. Isn't that obvious? It must be the sword of victory. Etian knocked on Qing Pin's head and mocked him without holding back. The sword of victory has already been synchronized once. It wasn't easy for Gahan to cut off her sword mark, but in the end, he courted death and touched her again. Serves him right for having to synchronize a second time. If you don't believe me, you can touch the victory sword and see if it's petrified. If it's petrified, then it's definitely the victory sword. Oh, Qing Pin jumped to Gahan's side and touched the victory sword with her little hand as she said with an innocent look on her face, "It's true. The sword of victory really turned into stone." Master Mo Di once said that the great Tao is above. Everything in this world has its own destiny. It seems like the sword of victory is destined to be masters, just like how Juzi is destined to be masters. Juzi said her second sentence in these 2 chapters. I'm not worried about whether the sword of victory is destined to be Gahan's. I'm only worried about one thing. Before Qi Dian could finish her sentence, Qing Pin's attention shifted from the sword of victory to the celestial entrapment sword. After touching it, she said in surprise, "Wow. Sister Celestial Entrapment Sword has also turned into stone. It's over. The worst has happened." Hearing Qing Pin's words, Qi Dian's entire body instantly softened. Other than the simple-minded and ignorant Qing Pin and Douyu, when the other sword maidens heard that the Celestial Entrapment Sword had also turned into stone, their expressions immediately changed, and they touched the 2 swords one after another. Oh no, it seems like Gahan is synchronizing with the Celestial Entrapment Sword and the Victory Sword at the same time. Etian also felt a little dizzy. Thinking about the serious consequences of this matter, her entire body started to heat up and become fearful. Little sister Juexian. Little sister Zhu Xian. Gahan. Guhan has 2 sword maidens at the same time. Gahan. Qi Dian stuttered for a long time, but in the end, she still did not say what she really wanted to ask. This was because Qi Dian was afraid of saying this out loud. Once it did, Qi Dian would immediately collapse. I'm sorry. This time, Gahan. He most likely won't survive. Zhu Xian lowered her head. Although her tone was very calm, no one could see her expression at that moment. Big sister, why are you apologizing? It's not your fault that Gahan is seeking his own death. Juexian looked indifferent. In reality, she did not have much of a relationship with Gahan, and could be considered the weakest among all the sword maidens. He clearly knows that once he synchronizes with 2 sword maidens who are not twin sisters, it will definitely cause the sword marks in his body to go berserk, and in the end his purple palace will explode and he will die. Yet he stupidly touched the Celestial Entrapment Sword and the Victory Sword at the same time. Isn't he seeking his own death? Juexian's sword shouted, "Shut up!" When Qi Dian, who was already feeling heartbroken, heard Zhu Xian's words, he immediately roared. Guhan is already being very careful. Guhan only did this because he fell into a trance. I forbid you from scolding him. I said so. I said so. Slap. Before Juexian's sword could finish, a slap landed directly on her face. How dare you hit me? How dare you hit me? One of the 4 immortal swords. Juexian's sword touched her face in disbelief, then suddenly exploded. Juexian's sword immediately appeared in her hand, and she slashed at Qi Dian's head. F*CK. I'm not afraid of you. Qi Dian's sword was not afraid, and the Qi Dian sword in her hand also met the attack head-on. The 2 swords collided in the air. Qi Dian and Juexian's sword came out in a rage and completely exploded with their strongest power. The entire room could not withstand the aftermath of such a violent collision, and an entire wall was directly knocked down, revealing the restaurant on the other side of the wall. Fortunately, because Guhan was synchronizing, there was no sword essence mixed in. Otherwise, if Qi Dian and Juexian sword fought with all their might, the entire restaurant would probably be reduced to nothing. Enough, Juexian. If anything happens to Gahan, we will all be finished. This world will be completely hopeless. Do you want to see the four of us sisters smashed into pieces? Now is not the time for you to rejoice in our misfortune. Juexian's sword snatched Juexian's sword from Juexian's sword's hand, and then directly slapped Juexian's sword's face. The sound was loud, even louder than Qi Dian's slap. I was wrong. After being slapped by her own sister, Juexian's sword came to its senses and lowered its head to admit its mistake. Sister Juexian, we can only rely on you now. Do you have any ideas? Is there any way to save Gahan? Qi Dian walked to Juexian's sword's side and was about to kneel down and beg Juexian's sword. Juexian's sword reacted quickly and hugged Qi Dian, then shook its head helplessly. I really don't have any ideas. If there was really a way to help Gahan, I would not hesitate to give my life to Gahan. After all, when we betrayed the old master, we already gave up our lives. How could this be? Qi Dian's sword heard Juexian's sword's words and became extremely helpless. I have an idea. I have an idea. Etian, who was also anxious, suddenly shouted excitedly. Hearing Etian's words, Qi Dian and the other sword ladies immediately surrounded Etian and asked her if she had any ideas. The thing that exploded was Guhan's purple palace, right? The purple palace is in Guhan's upper body, right? Actually, Gahan's head won't be in any danger, right? Etian said excitedly. If we take advantage of the instant Gahan synchronization is successful, and a few seconds before his purple palace explodes, and cut off Gahan's head and put in the medical pod, then Guhan won't have to die. As soon as Etian said this idea, all the sword ladies present fell silent. This idea was simply too wild and imaginative. They would need to spend some time to properly accept this idea. This idea might be able to save Gahan's life for a while, and through the medical pod, Big Brother's body can indeed recover. But what will happen then? Doyu's little face scrunched up together as she asked. The destruction of the Purple Palace is irreversible. Once the Purple Palace is destroyed, even if the body recovers tens of thousands of times, the Purple Palace will no longer exist, and Guhan will lose his Purple Palace forever. Qi Dian's sword answered after a moment of silence. Then, what will happen to the eight of us without the Purple Palace? Doyu asked again. We will return to our original form. Qi Dian's sword said calmly. We will return to being swords, fall into a deep sleep, and wait for the next sword wielder. Then I don't want to. Doyu immediately shook her head and strongly refused. Guyan finally got to live with Big Brother again. Guyan wants to be with Big Brother forever. Guyan really wants to give birth to Big Brother's children. Guyan will never return to being a sword that can't do anything. Guyan also doesn't want to be the sword lady of another sword wielder. Be it, as long as Gahan's life can be saved, that's more important than anything else. Actually, I'm the same as you. I won't be able to accept any other sword wielder in the future. So let us fall into a deep sleep forever. Qi Dian's sword touched Doyu's little face, then ordered Juzi, who was behind it. Juzi, time is of the essence now. We don't know when Gahan will end the synchronization. Go find Miss Lisihua immediately and bring her medical pod here. Quick! Juzi nodded and immediately left to carry out the order. Not long after, she returned with the medical pod and placed it next to Gahan. Next is the most important thing. When Gahan wakes up, who will cut off Gahan's head? Qi Dian's sword looked around at the rest of the sword ladies. None of them said anything. It was obvious that they did not want to do this. Then let me do it myself. Qi Dian's sword let out a long sigh. At the same time, it once again held the Qi Dian's sword tightly in its hand. Using its own sword to cut off its lover's head was something that Qi Dian's sword had never imagined. What are you guys doing? Stop being so noisy. Poverty, who had been lying on Guhan's petrified body and treating Guhan as a playful toy, looked at the domineering and despairing Qiu Han in front of him and asked in confusion. Chapter 1347. When Ching Pauper finished his sentence, Guhan, who had been petrified all this time, began to move. His skin was no longer the pale color of stone, but a pinkish blood color began to appear. Everyone get ready. Qi Dian took a deep breath and nervously gripped the hilt of his sword. He closed his eyes and placed one hand under Guhan's nose. Once Guhan regained his breath, Qi Dian would cut off Guhan's head. Suddenly, Qi Dian's finger felt a slight itch, and the tiny hairs on it began to flutter. The time had come. Forgive me, Guhan. 2 teardrops rolled down from the corner of Qi Dian's eyes, and the sword in his hand slashed towards Guhan's neck without hesitation. If Qi Dian's sword really landed on the unsuspecting Guhan's neck, then Guhan's head would really be separated from his body. At this critical moment, when the sword was less than 0.01 meters away from Guhan's neck, there was a crisp sound of the sword, and Qi Dian took a dozen steps back. Etian caught him from behind. What? Are you trying to murder Master? A woman in white stood in front of Guhan, frowning, and said in an imposing Ling manner, Today, I will get rid of this evil from Master. I will kill you sword ladies who dare to rebel against your superiors. What a valiant and heroic heroine. It was a pity that she did not maintain her heroic image for long before she was forcefully held in someone's arms. She wailed, My little sister. I'm not your little sister. My good little sister trapping a mortal. We finally meet. Whoa, big sister missed you so much. As Zhu Xian cried, she wiped the tears on her face on the heroine's chest, soaking her white feather robe. Let me go. Stay away from me. You're not allowed to come near me. However, the heroine did not have the slightest awareness of being a younger sister, nor did she cry like Zhu Xian. Instead, she pushed Zhu Xian's head, trying her best to push him away from her embrace. Get out of my way, you two. If you don't let me save Guhan, it'll be too late. Qi Dian came back to its senses and roared in sorrow. It picked up its Qi Dian sword and was about to cut off Guhan's head again. All right, I'm fine. Don't even think about hitting my head. In the next second, Guhan's voice rang out from behind the celestial captive sword. Then, he walked out unsteadily. Although Guhan's complexion didn't look good, his other aspects were still normal. There were no signs of his body breaking down. Husband, it's great that you're all right. Woo woo woo. Qi Dian threw the Qi Dian sword in its hand away and threw itself into Guhan's embrace, crying unrestrainedly. For the past 10 minutes, a huge amount of pressure had been piling up in Qi Dian's heart. Now that everything had come to an end, Qi Dian had completely let go of herself, and all the tears that had accumulated in her heart gushed out. All right. I didn't even blame you for wanting to cut off my head, so why are you crying? Guhan smiled as he wiped away the tears at the corner of Qi Dian's eyes. After hearing Guhan's words, Qi Dian felt even more ashamed, and its face became even more ashamed. And thank you, Lady Captive Immortal. If it wasn't for you, my head would have been separated from my body. Fleeting Maple patted the celestial captive sword beside him with a smile. Protect Master. This is the duty of the celestial captive sword, and I dare not accept Master's praise. The celestial captive sword replied respectfully. This celestial captive sword is completely different from her sisters. Guhan could not help but exclaim in his heart when he saw the celestial captive sword's reaction. The celestial extinguished sword was like a bomb buried beside him, and he did not know when it would explode. While the celestial bane sword was slightly better than the celestial extinguished sword, it was extremely indifferent. It was not to say that it was perfunctory towards Guhan, but it was simply to complete its own task. It was definitely not loyal or professional. Compared to these two masters, the immortal trapping sword sisters were completely different when they appeared. They gave off a sense of loyalty and trust. They were all twins, but why was there such a huge difference? Heartless fellow, you don't even want your own sister now that you have a man. The celestial extinguished sword grumbled unhappily. Guhan, what's going on? Why are you completely fine? Didn't you say that if you are unable to synchronize your two sisters, your mind palace will explode and you will die? Jian asked curiously. I also don't know why. Gohan smiled bitterly and said, but the fact is that the victory sword and the celestial captive sword's sword mark are now in my mind palace, and there is no conflict between them. Otherwise, I would rather you cut off my head. All right, then let's not care about these things for now. Jian shook its head and threw aside the questions that it could not understand. At the same time, it wiped away the tears on its face and put on a curious expression and asked, Gohan, you said that the victory sword and the celestial captive sword's sword mark are in your mind palace. Then what about the victory sword? Where is she now? Why is she not out? I am here. Can't you see me? Gohan replied. What do you mean, husband? Why don't I understand? Jian felt that there were more than 10 crows flying over its head at the same time. It could not understand what Gohan meant at all. I am here. Gohan smiled and said, Isn't the victory sword you were asking about here? What? It wasn't just Jian. All the sword maidens present felt a chill run down their spines when they heard this. Who gave you the right to pretend to be me? At that moment, a hand grabbed Gohan's shoulder from behind and pulled Gohan back. At the same time, a pale Gohan appeared from behind Gohan. Nice to meet you all. I'm very sorry to have played a small joke on you all. Let me introduce myself. I am the Victory Sword, but I hope that everyone will call me Guxuan Yuan. The Victory Sword stood in front of the sword ladies and said with a smile, Two big brothers. Douyu was frightened by the Victory Sword's appearance and said with a trembling body, In fact, in this room, other than the 4 immortal banishing swords and Qing Pin, all the sword ladies in the room looked confused. I'm not the big brother. I am the big sister. The Victory Sword stroked his hair with both hands, and his short hair, which was the same as Gohan's, instantly turned into long, black hair. His flat chest also began to expand rapidly, and finally became the size of a D cup. Although the Victoria Sword appearance was still the same as before, she seemed to have transformed into a beautiful and adorable girl with her long hair and voluptuous breasts. Isn't this your transformation? Husband, transformation? Jian stuttered, unable to finish his sentence. That's right. This is the appearance of a woman that I became because of the side effects of the 6 transformations immortal pill. This is Guxuan Yuan. There are also a few crows circling above Guhan's head. Guhan had never thought that the Sword of Victory would actually become like this after it was synchronized. Silence. The entire room was silent. When the sword ladies saw the male and female Guhan appear in front of them, after the initial shock, their cheeks puffed up and their faces were filled with smiles that were on the verge of bursting out. If not for the fact that Guhan's expression was not good, these sword ladies would have laughed maniacally. Laugh if you want. Even if you don't laugh today, you will still laugh tomorrow. As long as you are happy. Gohan waved his hand, as if he could not bear to see his sword ladies continue to hold back their laughter. Ha 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 ha. In the next second, the entire room was filled with deafening laughter. All the sword ladies, including Jian, were laughing so hard that they almost went crazy. Tell me about it. Why did you turn into me? After the deafening laughter in the room ended, Guhan looked at Victory Sword, who was also laughing and chatting nonstop. He did not feel that he was one of the protagonists being mocked. Master, you are too heartless. You didn't apologize to me first, and you want me to explain so many things to you. I'm not happy. The Victory Sword pouted and said coquettishly. At the same time, there was a hint of seduction. Seeing a woman who looked almost identical to him showing a flirtatious expression, Gohan was very calm, and he did not seem to be disturbed at all. If you're talking about my intention to cut off your sword mark, then I apologize to you. However, I have already told you about my situation. If I do not cut off your sword mark, I will die. I hope you can understand, Gohan said calmly. His words did not sound like he was apologizing. Forget it. I can't be bothered to argue with you. The Victory Sword rolled her eyes at Gohan. Master, don't tell me you have forgotten the first time you synchronized with me. Of course I remember. Gohan nodded. At that time, I took a little bit of the 6 transformations elixir and reached the level of a celestial sword wielder in a short 5 seconds. Then, I borrowed your strength to kill Gila. However, because it was only 5 seconds, you returned to your sword form. Bingo! The victory sword snapped her fingers and said, "However, you forgot to mention one thing. After the synchronization was successful, there was still my half-developed embryo left in your body. It was not just a sword mark. Then you took the whole 6 transformations elixir in one go and gave birth to the body of Gu Xianyuan, right? Then you borrowed the strength of the Xianyuan sword granny to become Gu Xianyuan and defeat the Nether River Patriarch, right?" "That's right." Gohan nodded again. "Humph. Do you think that body of Gu Xianyuan came for nothing?" The victory sword snorted coldly. "Actually, that was my embryo that had not formed yet. It was just that the Xianyuan sword granny forcefully developed and transformed it into Gu Xianyuan. Then, this body merged with your bloodline. This is the origin of Gu Xianyuan's identity. Gu Xianyuan is me, and I am Gu Xianyuan." "Understood." Gohan nodded. "So, the culprit was the Xianyuan sword granny." Chapter 1348. Little sister, let's be reasonable. I'm obviously your good sister. I don't care even if I'm your good sister. But how can you call me grandma? This is wrong. Before Gohan could summon the Xianyuan sword, the Xianyuan sword jumped out of the dimensional pocket and said to the victory sword with great dissatisfaction, "I'm not wrong. Mother is mother. I'm mother's mother, so of course, Xianyuan sword is your grandma." The victory sword's words made sense, and the Xianyuan sword was speechless. It could only keep waving its sword in the air and threaten, "Okay, you'll tear the tiles if you're not beaten for 3 days. Let's see how I deal with this unfilial granddaughter." "That's good. I also want to settle the score with you. If you didn't play tricks on my embryo, how could I become like this? I'm an immortal sword lady, and you're an emperor sword without a master. Do you think I'll be afraid of you?" The victory sword said, not to be outdone, "Enough. All of you shut up." Gohan suppressed all the quarrels with one sentence. He then controlled the angry Xianyuan sword in his hand and asked with a cold face, "Did you already expect what happened today? You already knew that Gu Xuanyuan's body is actually the body of the victory sword." "You can't say that." The Xianyuan sword snorted. "Gu Xuanyuan's body is actually your body. To put it bluntly, Gu Xuanyuan's body is still separated from your body. Otherwise, how could she look exactly the same as you? Your bodies are actually the same. Even if you go to test your DNA now, except for the X and Y chromosomes, all your chromosomes are exactly the same. How should I put it? You're the closest pair of twin brother and sister, a dragon and a phoenix. Twin brother and sister." Hearing the Xianyuan sword's words, Gohan's face became a little better. Twin brother and sister was already the best result. It was better than 2 Gohans. Also, I'm taking this matter seriously now. I'm filled with righteous indignation. I'm furious. I'm going to perish together with you. I'm telling you, you shouldn't blame me for this matter. Instead, you should thank me. Otherwise, you would have already died from the explosion of your purple palace. It could be seen that the Xianyuan sword was really in a bad mood. Otherwise, it wouldn't have thrown out so many idioms. "What do you mean?" Gohan's expression became tense. "Humph. If I hadn't shattered the embryo of the victory sword and fused it with your body, how could you have prevented the celestial trapping sword and the victory sword's sword scar from not reacting? It's because the embryo of the victory sword has mixed with your own flesh and blood to become the body of the victory sword. Therefore, the victory sword is the same as the Qi Dian sword. In terms of origin, it has already fused with your body. You are the twin brother and sister of the Qi Dian sword. That's why the sword scar of the celestial trapping sword didn't have any reaction to the sword scar of the victory sword. Because she thinks that the sword scar of the victory sword is a part of your Zifu. She doesn't know the existence of the victory sword." "I see." Gohan nodded. He believed that the Xianyuan sword wouldn't lie to him about this. At the same time, he understood why the victory sword could live in harmony with the sword mark of the celestial captive sword. "Wait, Grandma Xianyuan sword. This means that even if Gohan didn't use the green sever silk, he wouldn't have to worry about the victory sword. So, this precious green sever silk was wasted just like that. The heavenly sword said with a pained expression. Oh my God, how much could one green sever silk be sold for? How much Red Star Erdwo 2 could I buy with this money? It's all gone. Oh, it's all gone. Don't worry. Even if Gohan sold the green sever silk, he wouldn't buy you Red Star Erdwo 2. The celestial extinguished sword said while pinching the heavenly sword's butt. Don't call me Grandma. Otherwise, I'll kill you. The heavenly sword didn't even have time to get angry at the celestial extinguished sword before the Xian Yuan sword roared angrily. The victory sword immediately shrunk its head and didn't dare to say anything else. It was 2 against 1, and they were both Emperor swords. It really couldn't win. Also, this green sever silk wasn't wasted. Don't forget, the sword mark left in the Purple Palace wasn't the sword mark after the embryo fused. It was the sword mark left after the victory sword and Gohan synchronized for the first time. In fact, it was the original sword mark of the victory sword. If the celestial trap sword mark saw the original sword mark, there would be a fierce battle. By then, Gohan, your Purple Palace would still be finished. The Xian Yuan sword said with a humph. All right, I understand what you're trying to say. Gohan nodded and said, Now, please go back to your rooms. I'm sleepy. I want to sleep. After Gohan said this, he collapsed on the bed and fell asleep. Gohan was really too tired. When Gohan slept until the sun was high up in the sky, and he still wanted more, a hurried doorbell woke Gohan up. Great Son, Sword Immortal, what a rare guest. Why are you looking for me so early in the morning? Gohan, who was wearing pajamas, opened the door and saw an anxious Great Son, Sword Immortal standing at his door. He looked like he wanted to eat Gohan up. Your Majesty, let me ask you something. You must answer me honestly. This concerns the glory and future of our Yanjing city for thousands of years. The Great Sun Sword Immortal said hurriedly. He squeezed into the room, and then he was stunned. I say, Your Majesty, did you have a big fight with your 8 sword maidens yesterday? Why did the walls collapse? The Great Sun Sword Immortal looked at the half-collapsed wall in front of him and said in a daze. This broken wall was actually the result of the clash between the Qi Dian sword and the celestial extinguishing sword yesterday. Of course, Gohan could not tell the Great Sun Sword Immortal the truth. He only said lightly, Yesterday, I comprehended some sword techniques while thinking hard. I cannot control the vigorous sword Qi and accidentally leaked some of it out. When the time comes, the walls of this hotel will be destroyed. But don't worry, Great Sun Sword Immortal. If you're here for this broken wall, I will pay all the repair fees to you. I promise not to damage Yin Jing City's official business. No. It's just a broken wall. Who cares? The Great Sun Sword Immortal quickly waved his hands. He did not even know that the wall was damaged. How could he have come to find Gohan because of this wall? Then why is Great Sun Genie here? Gohan said with a smile. Actually, looking at the Great Sun Sword Immortal's anxious expression, Gohan had already guessed what the Great Sun Sword Immortal wanted to do. This was also within Gohan's expectations. Your Majesty, I have a question that you must answer me honestly. This concerns the glory and future of our Yanjing city for thousands of years. The Great Sun Sword Immortal said anxiously. Stop. Gohan pressed the Great Sun Sword Immortal down. Lord Sword Immortal, this is the second time you said this. If you have something to say, say it. I am from Yuzhong City. Yanjing City's glory and future have never had anything to do with our Yuzhong City. Brother Gohan, you're treating me like an outsider. Our Yanjing City and Yuzhong City are one. Everyone's glory and future are together. Don't say such things that make people doubt your status. The Great Sun Sword Immortal said with a smile. I say, Lord Sword Immortal, what do you want to say? Say it now. Don't beat around the bush with me. I'm still sleepy. If there's nothing else, I'm going back to sleep. Gohan's face showed signs of impatience. All right, then I'll say it. The Great Sun Sword Immortal gritted his teeth. This morning, His Majesty Long Sure told me that when you were in London, Your Majesty snuck into the Glastonbury stronghold of the Martyr's Palace and obtained a portion of the innate sword ladies that the traitor stole from Yinjing City's sword garret. Is this true? The great Sun Sword Immortal finally asked the question that had been hidden in his heart. This was indeed the most important thing to Yinjing City. Since the rebellion 2 years ago, Yinjing City's reputation had hit rock bottom. Nearly a tenth of the innate sword ladies had been stolen from the sword garret by a traitor. This was the greatest humiliation Yinjing City had ever suffered in the past 1,000 years. If not for Hao Tianjindi, who was still alive and well, supporting Great Sun Sword Immortal, the Great Sun Sword Immortal might have already resigned from his position as the chairman of the Yinjing City Sword Committee. He might even become the greatest sinner of Yinjing City and be cursed by countless descendants. Thus, these lost innate sword ladies had always been a huge boulder on Great Sun Sword Immortal's chest. For the past 2 years, the Great Sun Sword Immortal had been unable to breathe. The Great Sun Sword Immortal sent out almost all of the elite sword bearers in Yinjing City to gather information about the missing natural sword ladies. In the end, they really did find something. The Great Sun Sword Immortal personally took action and captured a universe-grade bandit from the Martyr's Palace. From him, he found out that the missing natural sword ladies were in the Glastonbury stronghold. But after hearing this news, the Great Sun Sword Immortal was in despair. Glastonbury was the most important stronghold of the Martyr's Palace in the human world, guarded by 3 flood-grade Yuan-Ko. If Hao Tianjindi hadn't weakened, then, with the power of 2 Jindi, it might have been possible to break through the defenses of the Glastonbury stronghold and take back the lost innate sword ladies. But Hao Tianjindi had already fallen into a weakened state, and Longshu Jindi was particularly stingy with his power. He was unwilling to agree to Yinjing City's request, and there had been no progress in the past 2 years. The Great Sun Sword Immortal had reached the end of his patience. He planned to gather all the immortal-grade sword-bearers in Yinjing City together, and then use some of Yinjing City's trump cards to enter the Glastonbury stronghold. Even if he had to sacrifice the lives of 5 or 6 immortal-grade sword-bearers, he had to rescue the innate sword ladies. Otherwise, he, the Great Sun Sword Immortal, would not die in peace. Chapter 1349. Well, the item is indeed with me, Guhan said with a conflicted and hesitant expression. When the Great Sun Sword Immortal heard Guhan's words, he heaved a sigh of relief. He was afraid that Guhan wouldn't admit that the natural sword ladies were with Guhan. This was because only Guhan and Li Bai knew about Guhan's infiltration of the Glastonbury outpost. Li Bai was with Guhan. If Guhan insisted that he didn't get anything from the outpost, then the Great Sun Sword Immortal really wouldn't have any evidence to prove that the item was with Guhan. Perhaps when the time came, Yuan-Ko of the Martyr's Palace would jump out and say that Guhan had stolen those natural sword ladies. But as long as Guhan insisted that this was Yuan-Ko's ploy, purposely to sow discord between him and Yinjing City and incite civil strife among humans, then the Great Sun Sword Immortal would still have no evidence to prove this. So if Guhan didn't admit it, the Great Sun Sword Immortal really wouldn't be able to do anything. Now that Guhan had admitted it, it was easy. Actually, the Great Sun Sword Immortal already had 3 cameras on him to record his conversation with Guhan. This would be used as evidence in the future. As long as Guhan admitted it now, it would be irrefutable evidence. Guhan wouldn't be able to deny it even if he wanted to. That's great. That's great. Your Majesty, please return the item to us. A few drops of tears flowed from the corner of the Great Sun Sword Immortal's eyes. He then stretched out his empty hand and placed it in front of Guhan. Return what to you? Guhan looked confused. This made the Great Sun Sword Immortal's heart clench. He immediately said, nervously, "Of course it's the natural sword ladies that your Majesty saved. These natural sword ladies originally belonged to Yinjing City. Naturally, they should be returned to their rightful owners." "Oh, so that's how it is." Guhan nodded, and a playful smile appeared on his face. "You people from Yinjing City really have a good plan. You want to ask me to take the things away without any evidence?" You can't do this, right? I understand. The great sun sword immortal's face revealed a hint of bitterness. It seemed like his initial plan to take back the item without paying anything had been a little too good. Gohan had taken the item back, and he had not done anything in return. That was indeed a little too petty. Forget it. Since the responsibility is on me, I'll settle it myself. Therefore, the great sun sword immortal said solemnly and righteously, Your Majesty, the Sea Emperor's great kindness, I, the great sun sword immortal, will never forget. From now on, Your Majesty, the Sea Emperor's matters are my matters. Even if Your Majesty, the Sea Emperor, wants my life, I will not dare to disobey. From now on, if Your Majesty, the Sea Emperor has any orders as long as I, the great sun sword immortal, am still alive, I will definitely not refuse. The great sun sword immortal's words sounded righteous and unyielding, as if he was offering himself up to the Sea Emperor. But in reality, the great sun sword immortal knew very well that these were just words that sounded nice. Did Gohan have the guts to order him around, to make him, the chairman of the Yin Jing City Sword Committee, work for him with his life on the line? This kind of thing might happen once or twice, but if it happened too many times, not to mention what kind of discussions it would cause in society, even Gohan himself would feel embarrassed. Therefore, the great sun sword immortal believed that Gohan would not give him too many orders. It was even possible that he would not give any orders at all. As for the reason, it was very simple. It was because Gohan's strength was too high. As a spiritual sword level sword wielder, he was only second to an Emperor sword level sword wielder. From the looks of it, it would be a piece of cake for Gohan to become an immortal sword level sword wielder. And when Gohan became an immortal sword, his strength would probably be comparable to an Emperor sword level sword wielder. Although he was the strongest among the immortal sword level sword wielder, compared to Gohan's strength, there was already a huge gap. If he could do it, so could Gohan. There was no need for him to trouble him. And if even Gohan could not do it, then it was even more impossible for him to do it. Gohan would not use this kind of thing to make things difficult for him. Therefore, although the great sun sword immortal's words sounded very beautiful, they did not mean much. The great sun sword immortal felt that he would at most be ordered around by Gohan once or twice. Such a simple condition in exchange for all the natural sword ladies. No matter how you looked at it, it was a good deal. Moreover, this also sounded very prestigious. The dignified chairman of the Yin Jing City Sword Committee took the initiative to give himself to envoy Gohan. How much face did he give to Gohan? After hearing this condition, shouldn't he happily return the things to him? Unfortunately, the great sun sword immortal was wrong, because Gohan was not someone who would be fooled by such superficial things. What the great sun sword immortal could think of, how could it be hidden from Gohan's eyes? There's no need to say more. This doesn't mean much to me. To put it bluntly, I don't think much of the great sun sword immortal's ability. Gohan said indifferently, and this unceremonious and merciless sentence made the great sun sword immortal's face turn as black as a large piece of rag. Your Majesty, what do you mean? The great sun sword immortal said darkly. Great sun sword immortal, do you not understand what I mean? Should I say it directly? Gohan looked at the great sun golden immortal's clothes, which were decorated with many transparent gems, and smiled. If I say the truth, it won't be good if it's recorded in a video. This guy knows I have a video camera on me. The great sun sword immortal was shocked. At the same time, his body felt a little cold. In order to hide the small video camera on him, he had specially chosen this set of clothes with all kinds of gems. He did not expect that Gohan would see through it. However, the great sun sword immortal was not willing to be attacked by Gohan just like that. Right now, Gohan was still a spiritual sword rank sword wielder, and he was still an immortal sword rank sword wielder. He did not believe that his strength was really useless against Gohan. Your Majesty, I may not be as strong as Your Majesty, but I'm sure there's a limit to the difference. Your Majesty, please have a try with me. If my strength is really too far from Your Majesty's, then I won't dare to shamelessly say that I can help Your Majesty. Great Sun, Sword Immortal said. Interesting. Guhan revealed a playful smile. Then may I ask, Great Sun, Sword Immortal, what kind of difference would be considered limited? This. The Great Sun, Sword Immortal was a little hesitant. It was easy to say this, but it was difficult to put it into practice. The Great Sun, Sword Immortal really did not know what kind of difference would be considered limited. The book did not mention how much difference there was between an immortal sword rank and a spiritual sword rank sword wielder. No, the book did mention it, but it said that an immortal sword rank sword wielder was much stronger than a spiritual sword rank sword wielder, but it did not say how much stronger a spiritual sword rank sword wielder would be compared to an immortal sword wielder. At this thought, the Great Sun Sword Immortal felt his face burning. He was probably the first immortal sword wielder in history to think about the difference in strength between him and a spiritual sword wielder. But the Great Sun Sword Immortal had no choice but to consider this question, because when they had attacked Guhan on the street, although all the immortal sword bearers had held back and not used their true strength, they had still used at least 50% of their strength. From that moment on, the Great Sun Sword Immortal knew that he was no match for Guhan. Sir, you've thought for so long. It's time for you to give me an answer. Guhan's voice urged in the Great Sun Sword Immortal's ear. 1 hour. If I can last an hour against your Majesty the Sea King, then it means that your Majesty the Sea King and I aren't too far apart in strength. What do you think, your Majesty the Sea King? The Great Sun Sword Immortal said through gritted teeth. Under normal circumstances, it was normal for two immortal sword wielder to fight for 3 days and 3 nights. But in his own words, there was only 1 hour left. Although this was said by the Great Sun Sword Immortal himself, the Great Sun Sword Immortal still felt very ashamed. 1 hour. Guhan's expression became non-committal. Even a week ago, if he used all his strength, the Great Sun Sword Immortal would not be able to last an hour, let alone now. Sir, I've just crawled out of bed, and you want me to fight you? That's a little inappropriate. How about this? I'll show you something. After you see it, if you think it's about the same as mine, then I'll fight you. Guhan said with a smile. All right. Although the Great Sun Sword Immortal did not know what Guhan had up his sleeve, he still agreed readily. Guhan smiled and nodded. Today, I'll invite the Great Sun Sword Immortal to have a look at my sword maidens. As Guhan spoke, he clapped his hands. From all the rooms in the presidential suite flew out blinding rays of sword light. When all the sword lights stopped, the Great Sun Sword Immortal realized that there were sword maidens floating beside Guhan. This Guhan, why is he showing off his sword maidens now? The Great Sun Sword Immortal muttered. With an awkward smile, he said to Guhan, Your Majesty, I know you have a lot of sword maidens. You don't have to take them out to embarrass me. No, I'm not trying to embarrass you. I just want you to count how many sword maidens I have. Guhan smiled. What's there to count? Everyone in this world knows that your Majesty has 8 sword maidens. The Great Sun Sword Immortal said, confused. Count them. It's not too late to count before you speak. Guhan squinted his eyes and said, all right. The Great Sun Sword Immortal was helpless. Since Guhan had requested this, he could only do as he was told. Then he carefully looked at the sword maidens floating in front of him, and then beads of sweat covered the Great Sun Sword Immortal's face. Chapter 1350. 10. It's 10. When the Great Sun Sword Immortal counted the number of sword maidens floating beside Guhan, his forehead was covered in sweat. If he had not known that Guhan was the wielder of the dual sword maidens, the Great Sun Sword Immortal would have thought that Guhan had broken through the heavens and surpassed the 6 sword maidens of an emperor sword wielder. He had reached a level that no one had ever reached before. But now Guhan had 10 sword maidens. What did this mean? Didn't this mean that Guhan was already a celestial sword wielder? The Great Sun Sword Immortal started to wipe the sweat off his forehead. He had thought that he could last an hour against Guhan. Now that Guhan was a celestial sword wielder, he might not even last 5 minutes, let alone an hour. Guhan was right. He was not attractive to Guhan at all now. If the situation was dangerous to the point where Guhan needed his help, then he would only be sending himself to his death. The reason was simple. If it was an opponent that Guhan could not defeat, then he would only be sending himself to his death. Thinking of this, the great Sun Sword Immortal's previous words were all for naught. The great Sun Sword Immortal carefully calculated his trump card, and sadly found that he didn't even have a single condition that could attract Guhan. What was worse was that even if he did not hold back and let all the immortal sword rank sword bearers in Yanjing City act to forcefully threaten Guhan, considering the strength of both sides, unless the Clear Sky Sword Emperor also acted, it was likely that all the immortal sword rank sword bearers in Yanjing City would not be able to defeat Guhan. Not to mention that the state of the Clear Sky Sword Emperor was extremely bad. His lifespan was on the verge of death, and he could die at any time. After this fight, the Clear Sky Sword Emperor would probably die in advance. More importantly, this would trigger the biggest internal strife in human history in Yanjing City, and the entire Yanjing City would become the culprit of destroying human harmony. The great Sun Sword Immortal would not do such a thing. Even if he did not want these natural sword maidens, he would not fight Guhan. But the problem was, what trump card did he have to make a deal with Guhan? The only thing that reassured the great Sun Sword Immortal was that while Guhan's words were very displeasing, he could see that Guhan still wanted to negotiate. This meant that Guhan actually had some thoughts and was willing to return the natural sword maidens to Yanjing City. This was what Yanjing City had to fight for. But in this way, the control of the entire negotiation was completely in the hands of Guhan. All Yanjing City could do was to passively accept Guhan's request. They didn't even have the right to refuse. Great Sun Sword Immortal, why aren't you saying anything? Do you still want to spar with me? Guhan asked slyly. I wouldn't dare. I wouldn't dare. The great Sun Sword Immortal waved his hands. At the same time, he sighed in his heart. As the chairman of Yanjing City's Sword Committee, when did he become so cowardly? Yuzhong City's luck was too good. 100 years ago, they had just produced the powerful Gu Jin Jiandi. Now, an even more terrifying Jiandi, Guhan, was about to appear. What was going on? Thinking of this, the great Sun Sword Immortal unconsciously glanced at the 10 sword maidens floating beside Guhan. His entire body trembled. A terrifying thought suddenly appeared in his mind. With 2 more sword maidens, this Guhan had already ascended to the throne. Who knew? Thus, the great Sun Sword Immortal asked weakly, Your Majesty, what level of sword wielder are you now? Great Sun Sword Immortal, you worry too much. Seeing the great Sun Sword Immortal's slightly panicked expression, Guhan said calmly, I have less than 10 million quarks in my body. I'm not fated to become the Honorable Emperor Sword Maidens. That's good. That's great. Your Majesty, it seems like you can control 2 Emperor Sword Maidens at the same time. Your might will shake the world and surpass Zhetion. It's only a matter of time. Poor great Sun Sword Immortal. Even his words became careful. He even had to flatter Guhan against his will, afraid that his words would anger Guhan. Seeing the great Sun Sword Immortal's aggrieved expression, Guhan also knew that he could not put on too much of a show. If he continued acting like this, it would cause great indignation in Yanjing City. This would not be harmonious for the future of humanity. All right, actually, I was planning to return these natural sword maidens to Yanjing City. It's just that I've encountered so many things along the way. I feel a little aggrieved, so I have no choice but to put on a show. Guhan said with a smile, and this sentence made the great Sun Sword Immortal feel much more at ease. Next, as long as he obediently accepted Guhan's conditions, these natural sword maidens that Yanjing City had lost could all be returned. Your Majesty, please tell me what you want. The main thing is that I will give you whatever Yanjing City can give you. The great Sun Sword Immortal hurriedly expressed his stance. Since all the initiative was in Guhan's hands, he might as well do Guhan a favor. Perhaps he can make Guhan feel guilty and lower his own conditions. First, the Sword Committee will be re-elected next year, right? Guhan said with a smile. Yes. The Sword Committee is re-elected every 5 years. Each time, the Immortal and Emperor Sword Maidens vote to choose the committee chairman and secretary. The Immortal and Emperor Sword Maidens have 1 vote, and the Emperor Sword Maidens have 5 votes. The current chairman of the Sword Committee is Yinjing City's Hao Tianjindi. However, Hao Tianjindi's body condition is too bad. He will not be re-elected. So this time, the chairman should be Long Shi Jindi. The great sun, Sword Immortal, nodded and said. At the same time, his heart moved. Could it be that Gahan wanted the position of the chairman of the Sword Committee? The position of chairman of the Sword Committee was not a good one, either. After all, the 8 base cities were decided by the Sword Committee of the 8 base cities. The Sword Committee could only offer suggestions on macro control and had no right to intervene in the specific affairs of the base cities. As for other major events that needed to be decided by the Sword Committee and were related to the whole human race, they couldn't be decided by the president alone. They needed to be discussed and decided by the Sword Committee. From this point of view, the president of the Sword Committee was more like a beautiful vase. However, it would be a big mistake to say that the chairman of the Sword Committee was not a good one. The chairman of the Sword Committee was the highest leader of the human race in name. It was equivalent to the President of the United States or the chairman of the Celestial Empire. It was the highest position in the entire human race. Regardless of whether this position had the right or not, to be able to sit in this position was the greatest honor in the world. Not only could he boast for the rest of his life, his descendants could boast for 10 lifetimes. Although all the orders of the Sword Committee were decided by the members of the Sword Committee, the chairman of the Sword Committee had the right to veto. In other words, if the Sword Committee felt that this matter was wrong, even if the other sword holders agreed, the chairman of the Sword Committee had the right to veto it. Moreover, when there was a crisis that concerned the future of the human race, the Sword Committee had the power to force the 8 base cities to listen to the orders of the Sword Committee unconditionally. All the resources and manpower of the 8 base cities would be allocated to the Sword Committee. For example, during the Battle of the Alps, the Sword Committee was in charge of all the resources and sword-bearers of the 8 base cities. Even the Emperor's sword-bearers had to listen to the orders of the Sword Committee unconditionally. That was how they managed to work together and avoid a huge crisis for the human race. Once the human race was in a very passive situation and needed someone to decide, the chairman of the Sword Committee had the right to gather all the decision-making power in his hands. Without any discussion, he could directly command the human race according to his own orders and will. When that time came, the chairman of the Sword Committee would be the most powerful person in the human race. He could directly control the fate of every human. In general, the chairman of the Sword Committee was usually just for show. Sometimes he could be a troublemaker, but at the most crucial time, he could become the supreme existence in the world. All along, other than a few times, the position of chairman of the Sword Committee had been monopolized by the Emperor's swordholders in Yinjing City. The reason was simple. The number of immortal-level sword wielders in Yinjing City was usually the highest among the 8 base cities. As long as Yinjing City did not cause public anger among the 8 base cities, it was extremely easy to push their Emperor sword wielders to the position of chairman of the Sword Committee through voting rights. For example, since the death of the powerful Gu Jinjindi, the position of chairman of the Sword Committee had been held by 2 generations of Emperor swordholders in Yinjing City for close to 70 years. This was the second longest continuous holding in history. The Great Sun Sword Immortal wanted to break the record of 170 consecutive years when the Sword Committee was established. He didn't expect Gahan to use this as a bargaining chip to threaten him. His Majesty the Sea King wants Yinjing City to support His Majesty to be the chairman of the Sword Committee. The Great Sun Sword Immortal decided to go all out. Anyway, it would take at least 5 years for Gahan to ascend to the throne. After 5 years, no one in the world would be Gahan's match. Then, even if he didn't vote for Gahan, Gahan would still be able to ascend to the position of Emperor Swordholders. Yinjing City actually didn't suffer too much. Thus, the Great Sun Sword Immortal gritted his teeth and said, "Okay, If His Majesty the Sea King wants it, then as long as His Majesty ascends to the throne, Yinjing City will definitely support His Majesty the Sea King to take over as chairman of the Sword Committee. His Majesty the Sea King will definitely be able to ascend to the position. Wrong. Gohan shook his head. It's not waiting for me to become an Emperor Sword Holder. It's going to happen next year. Whatever Sword Holder I will be next year, you have to support my person to ascend to the position of chairman of the Sword Committee. Chapter 1351. Your Majesty, why do I not understand what you're saying? The great Sun Sword Immortal asked dumbly after hearing Gohan's request. From what Gohan had said, the great Sun Sword Immortal could conclude two important requests. First, Gohan had to be the chairman of the Sword Committee next year. Secondly, there was a possibility that Gohan would not hold the position of the chairman of the Sword Committee and would pass it to someone else. These two requests scared the great Sun Sword Immortal. After hesitating for a while, he said, Your Majesty, are you confident that you can ascend to the throne next year? No. Gohan shook his head decisively. It hasn't even been 4 years since I became an ancient sword wielder to a celestial sword wielder. My foundations aren't solid, and I haven't even built my own army. How can I ascend to the throne in a year? I almost forgot that this guy is insane. He only used 4 years to go from ancient sword to celestial sword wielder. Hearing Gohan's words, the great Sun Sword Immortal thought back to the 20 years he had spent in the ancient sword realm. He couldn't help but curse in his heart. To be able to become an immortal sword wielder in 20 years, the great Sun Sword Immortal could be considered a genius among sword wielder. However, compared to Gohan's 4 years, he still paled in comparison. Your Majesty Gohan, you want to be the chairman of the Sword Committee as a celestial sword wielder? The great Sun Sword Immortal asked bitterly. Gohan nodded. Is there a problem? There's no precedent for this. The great Sun Sword Immortal smiled even more bitterly. For thousands of years, the chairman of the Sword Committee has always been an Emperor sword wielder. There's never been a celestial sword wielder. I'm afraid this is against the rules. Rules are made by people. This isn't a big deal. Gohan said disdainfully. Moreover, it's not like there are no examples of immortal sword wielders serving as the chairman of the Sword Committee in history. Didn't the 3rd, 4th, and 5th generation family heads of the Lunyan family become the chairman of the Sword Committee as immortal sword wielders? If they can, why can't I? Your Majesty, why are you talking about 800 years ago? How can that be compared to now? The great Sun Sword Immortal didn't know what expression to make. The truth was as Gohan had said. After Kinzu died, the 5 generations of Lunyan family's family leaders had monopolized the Sword Committee. They had been the chairman for close to 120 years as celestial sword wielder. Moreover, at that time, the chairman of the Sword Committee was not like the current chairman, who was just a vase. At that time, the chairman had real power. As long as the chairman said a word, the entire Sword Committee would not object. The entire human race had the will of a family as the core, just like a real emperor. It wasn't that there weren't any emperor sword wielders back then. On the contrary, there were 5 emperor sword wielders at the same time. However, the problem was that Kinzu and his son Lu Guangjini's prestige was too high. They were like royalty in this world. People were used to seeing the Lunyan family as the new world's emperor. It was only natural that their descendants would become the leaders of the human race. Most of the emperor sword wielders had received favors from the Lunyan family before they ascended to the throne. They would not object to the Lunyan family's rule. If Jianjini hadn't received any favors from the Lunyan family since he was born, and there had been a lot of dirt between them, the 6th generation of the Lunyan family had almost destroyed Jianjini's foundation. Therefore, when Jianjini dominated the world and became invincible, he slapped the Lunyan family in the face many times. The Lunyan family was very disgusted. Moreover, the Lunyan family's morals were slowly declining. The 6th generation of the family leader was a complete spoiled brat. Many experts didn't like him. In the end, the 5th generation of the family leader decided to retreat. He completely gave up the position of chairman of the Sword Committee. He also left a message for the Lun Yin family to only fight for humans and not participate in human politics. One had to admit that the fifth generation of the family leader's decision was very correct. This allowed the Lun Yin family to retreat at the most critical time. Not only did they protect their beautiful reputation, but they also won the praise and sympathy of other experts and the entire society, especially the people of Yinjing City. They felt very wronged by the Lun Yin family's retreat. They hated Zhejian Jindi from the bottom of their hearts. This hatred also extended to Zhejian Jindi's Yuzhong City. The 800-year-old grudge officially appeared from this moment on. Back to the main topic, the great Sun Sword Immortal was very unwilling to let Gahan be the chairman of the Sword Committee when he was still a Celestial Sword Saint. Although there were indeed examples of Celestial Sword Saints becoming the chairman of the Sword Committee in history, that was the Lun Yin family. They were the descendants of Kinzu, the supreme expert who had saved all of humanity. Who are you, Gahan? Aren't you just powerful? Is your bloodline as noble as the Lun Yin families? I've never even heard of your Gu family. That's not right. The Gu family did have such a family. It seemed to have some fame, but it was completely covered by the upper echelons of humanity. The ancestors of the Gu family were probably not good people. The great Sun Sword Immortal grumbled in his heart. If he knew that the entire Lun Yin family was a direct descendant of Gahan, the great Sun Sword Immortal would probably not care about the bloodline anymore. Great Sun Sword Immortal, think about it carefully. Actually, there's no need to be so conflicted about this. All Yinjing City needs to do is to vote for my people. As for whether I will become the chairman of the Sword and Immortal Level Sword Committee, that is not something that Yinjing City needs to worry about. Guhan said mildly, "All right, the matter regarding the Fairy Sword Saint has been decided. With His Majesty Neptune's ability, even if you become the chairman of the Sword Committee, no one will be dissatisfied. After all, your ability is already comparable to an Emperor Sword level sword wielder. But based on your Majesty's words, your Majesty, don't you want to be the chairman yourself?" The great Sun Sword Immortal asked the question that he cared about the most. That's right. If I become the chairman of the Sword Committee headquarters, I will have to stay in Yinjing City for at least 3 months a year. I can't do that, and I will bring trouble to Yinjing City. So I will arrange my apprentice Lu Shihua to be the chairman of the Sword Committee headquarters. Gahan said directly. This Gahan actually pushed his disciple out for the second time. This was really something. Shihua, Sword Spirit. The great Sun Sword Immortal's face stiffened. Lu Shihua had already confirmed his title the day before. He would use the last 2 words of his name as his title. It sounded rather pleasant to the ear as well. A Sword Saint was the upper limit that the great Sun Sword Immortal could accept. A Sword Committee chairman of the Spirit Sword Saint was something that the great Sun Sword Immortal could not accept. Thinking of all the humans in the world worshipping a Sword Saint as their highest leader, this would probably become the biggest joke in human history. Your Majesty, definitely not. Sword Spirit Shihua's power. Even if I agree, I can't convince the other Sword Saint swordsmen to agree. I know what you're worried about. Without waiting for the great Sun Sword Immortal to finish, Guhan interrupted him. I admit that it would be inappropriate for a spiritual sword level sword wielder to be the chairman of the Sword Committee. Therefore, before the election of the Sword Committee, I will make Shihua an immortal sword wielder. If she cannot reach this standard, I will give up on this condition. I haven't mentioned it yet. The great Sun Sword Immortal hesitated, but finally nodded. All right, as long as Sword Spirit Shihua can become Sword Immortal Shihua, then Yinjing City will fully support Sword Spirit Shihua to be the chairman of the Sword Committee. If it were any other Spirit Sword level sword wielder, the great Sun Sword Immortal would definitely not agree to such a condition. However, Lu Shihua was different. Lu Shihua was destined to be an Emperor Sword level sword wielder. If they pushed Lu Shihua up when she was still at immortal sword level, and with the support of a terrifying guy like Guhan, when the time came, Yinjing City would naturally agree. It would not cause too much dissatisfaction from the other base cities. Very good. So this matter is happily decided. Gohan smiled. Our poor Lu Shihua didn't know that unknowingly, after Yuzhong City's sword court master, our Miss Lu Shihua was once again pushed to the position of chairman by Gohan. This time, Lu Shihua had no right to refuse. Since it's decided, Your Majesty, can you return our natural sword lady to me? The great sun, sword immortal, looked at flowing time Maple expectantly. Not now. You have to agree to one condition of mine. Gohan squinted. Your Majesty, don't go too far. We've already promised you to push Sword Immortal Shihua to the position of chairman of the Sword Committee, but you still want other conditions. The great sun, Sword Immortal, stood up angrily. He didn't expect Flowing Time Maple to be so greedy. Great sun, Sword Immortal, please calm down. Gohan smiled nonchalantly and then said coldly, May I ask, great sun, Sword Immortal, what price did you pay for the first condition? Isn't it just raising your hand? Just waving your hand? Yinjing City actually didn't pay any price, and you can get back your natural sword lady. How can it be such a good thing in the world? You, the great sun, Sword Immortal's face flushed red. This was the position of the chairman of the Sword Committee. How could it be something as simple as raising one's hand? Although in reality, Yinjing City did not pay any substantial price. Great sun, Sword Immortal, don't be angry. I, Gohan, will leave my words here. If you don't agree to my second condition, I will immediately bring my people back to Yuzhong City and enshrine the natural sword lady in Yuzhong City's sword court. In the future, your Yinjing City sword bearers can also come to Yuzhong City sword court to coordinate. I promise I won't stop any of them. You'll just have to work a little harder and travel a little more. Gohan smiled. The great sun, Sword Immortal, finally sat down helplessly. If the people of Yinjing City had to run all the way to Yuzhong City to get what he wanted, then he, the great sun, Sword Immortal, would probably be the most embarrassing chairman of the Sword Committee in the history of Yinjing City. Chapter 1352. Speak. What other conditions do you have? The great sun, Sword Immortal, said helplessly. He had no idea how to deal with Gohan. Actually, it's not something too important. Gohan looked at the 10 sword maidens floating beside him and said calmly, I want a superdimensional wall system. Superdimensional wall system. The great sun, Sword Immortal, was shocked and looked deeply at Gohan. It wasn't that the great sun, Sword Immortal, was reluctant to give up this superdimensional wall system, because the dimensional wall factory in Yinjing City already had 2 superdimensional wall systems in storage. These 2 systems have been in storage for more than 300 years and were just gathering dust for no reason. Even if he gave one to Fleeting Maple, he wouldn't be reluctant to give it up. At most, he could just produce another set. The great sun, Sword Immortal, was truly shocked by the reason why Gohan wanted a superdimensional wall system. Since ancient times, the superdimensional wall system only had one purpose, and that was to be the core defense of a headquarters city. It could be said that the superdimensional wall system was the foundation of a headquarters city's existence. As long as the superdimensional wall system was present, the headquarters city would have the possibility of maintaining its existence for a long time. Other than the headquarters city, there were no other places that could use the superdimensional wall system. The great sun, Sword Immortal, thought about it further, and it wasn't hard for him to guess why Fleeting Maple wanted this superdimensional wall system. Your Majesty, could it be that you want to build a 9th headquarters city? The great sun, Sword Immortal, was stumped for a long time and finally asked the question that had been on his mind. This was a question that could cause huge waves in the entire human world. Ever since the Los Angeles headquarters city was built, there hadn't been a new headquarters city in the human world for more than 400 years. The 8 human headquarters cities have been maintained for 400 years, and there hadn't been another headquarters city. It wasn't that humans didn't want to build a new headquarters city, but it was just too difficult to build one. In the early stages of a headquarters city's construction, especially during the month when the superdimensional wall system was being built, Yuan-ko would take advantage of the time when humans didn't have the dimensional wall system to attack the city. Even the prehistoric Yuan-ko couldn't help but attack. wanting to destroy the headquarters city in its infancy. Humans might have succeeded in building 8 headquarters cities, but these 8 headquarters cities were built on dozens of other failed headquarters cities, as well as on countless human bones. Without an Emperor Sword wielder who was strong enough to suppress an era, it was impossible to succeed. To be able to suppress an era, an Emperor Sword wielder would only appear once every few hundred years. For example, Kinzu and Flowing Light Jiandi from 1,000 years ago, Jitian Jiandi from 800 years ago, Longevity Jiandi from 600 years ago, and Without End Jiandi from 400 years ago. They were all Yuan Ko that could suppress all prehistoric Yuan Ko. They were beaten to the point that they trembled and had no choice but to allow humans to build new headquarters cities. Apart from that, the other Jiandi that attempted to build new headquarters cities all returned in failure. Some Jiandi even died in the bases they were protecting, becoming one of the greatest tragedies of humanity. Could it be that at this moment, this Guhan, who was only at the immortal sword tier, also had the idea of building a headquarters city? That's right. I have 2 dreams in this life. One is to kill all the Yuan Ko in the world, and the other is to build a headquarters city myself. Gohan put away his playful expression and looked at the great sun sword immortal seriously. But this is too dangerous. Only those emperor swords that can suppress an era. I can suppress an era. No, I want to end an entire era and even surpass the emperor sword tier sword bearers. An endless aura exploded from Gohan's body in an instant. This aura actually made the great sun sword immortal breathless. He felt like he was about to suffocate. This was a feeling that the great sun sword immortal had never felt before in front of Long Shi Jiandi and Hao Tian Jiandi. Surpass. Emperor swords. The great sun sword immortal said in a daze. He had never thought that Gohan's life goal would be so great. It was close to the level of a lunatic's ravings. No, this Gohan might not be a lunatic's ravings. He might really have the ability to surpass the Emperor Sword tier swordbearers. After all, Kinzu was rumored to be on the verge of surpassing the Emperor Sword tier, and this Gohan's achievement at the Spiritual Sword tier is an achievement that Kinzu can only achieve at the Celestial Sword tier. Perhaps this Gohan can really surpass the Emperor Sword tier swordbearers and become an unprecedented super expert in human history. I might be fortunate enough to witness the birth of such a powerful sword-bearer in front of me. This thought suddenly flashed through the great sun sword immortal's mind. Although the great sun sword immortal's thought was ridiculous and nonsensical, this thought took root in the great sun sword immortal's mind. However, regardless of whether this Gohan had the ability to surpass the Emperor Sword tier sword-bearers, one thing was for sure. Once this Gohan became an Emperor Sword tier sword-bearer, he would definitely be able to suppress an entire era. Moreover, he had the full support of his disciple Lu Shihua. The human's 9th headquarters city might be born in Gohan's hands. What right did he have to reject the human's 9th headquarters city? Thinking of this, the great sun sword immortal did not hesitate. He stood up and said, "As long as your majesty the Sea King has the heart, Yanjing City will definitely support your majesty the Sea King in building the 9th headquarters city. We will expand our territory and fight for a bigger living space for us humans." Thank you. Seeing the great sun sword immortal's sincere face, Gohan also sincerely held the great sun sword immortal's arm and said seriously, "Great sun sword immortal, please rest assured. This 9th headquarters city will definitely be built in my hands." Good. Our Yanjing City will definitely support your majesty, the Sea King, with all our strength. The great sun sword immortal also held Gohan's hand. I don't have too many requests. As long as Yanjing City can teach me a complete super-dimensional defense system, that will be enough. Gohan said quickly. No problem. Isn't it just a complete set of the super-dimensional wall protection system? We already have 2 sets in Yanjing City's warehouse. Give your majesty the Sea Emperor a complete set. Wait. The great sun sword immortal suddenly paused. He stared into Gohan's eyes, and hesitation flashed across his eyes. I wonder what your Majesty the Sea Emperor means by a complete set? What else could it mean? It's a complete, super-dimensional wall system that doesn't lack anything, Guhan said faintly. Then, as the core of the super-dimensional defense system, the Emperor's Zergs will also be included. Of course, without the most important core, how can it be considered a complete super-dimensional defense system? I see. So this is what your Majesty the Sea King really wants. The great sun sword immortal slowly pushed Guhan's hand away and smiled like a bitter gourd. So your Majesty the Sea King is waiting for me here. What you want is not some super-dimensional defense system, but our Yanjing city's Emperor Zergs. In the entire human world, other than your Yanjing city, there are no Emperor Zergs that are free. If I don't ask you for it, who else should I ask? Guhan sighed. That Emperor Zerg has been in your warehouse for almost 400 years. If something is not used, no matter how precious it is, it's just a piece of stone. Why don't you let me build a base city and bring more benefits to the human race? The great sun sword immortal did not speak. He slowly stood up and said to Guhan, Your Majesty the Sea King, this is a serious matter. It is not something that I, the great sun sword immortal, can decide on my own. I have to ask how Yanjindi. I will only be able to agree after a meeting of the Yanjing City Sword Committee. Please forgive me for not being able to give you an answer now. Understand. Guhan nodded. The great sun sword immortal nodded as well. Then, the great sun sword immortals slightly hunched back, prepared to leave Guhan's room to look for the sword committee for a meeting. Wait. Guhan suddenly called out to the great sun sword immortal. The great sun sword immortal turned his head in confusion and saw a red pouch thrown in front of him. This is... The great sun sword immortal took the red pouch and realized that it was actually a dimensional pouch from a few hundred years ago. Moreover, it was in an ownerless state. The great sun sword immortal sent his consciousness into the dimensional brocade pouch to take a look. He was shocked to find that there were hundreds of natural sword ladies inside. Looking closely, weren't these the natural sword ladies that Yanjing City had lost? Your Majesty the Sea King, what do you mean by this? The great sun sword immortal held the dimensional pouch in his hands and looked at Guhan in confusion and confusion. I, Guhan, am not an unreasonable person. These innate sword ladies all belong to your Yanjing City. They were painstakingly saved up by your ancestors in Yanjing City. When I retrieved these natural sword ladies from the Glastonbury outpost, I never thought of keeping them to myself. I'm just returning them to their rightful owners. Guhan said calmly. The great sun sword immortal looked at the natural sword ladies that he had lost and regained. He felt as if he had been on a roller coaster today. He couldn't help but tear up. A few turbid tears flowed out from his eyes. Your Majesty the Sea King, Your Majesty. The great sun sword immortal's voice was choked up. Don't worry. Whether you agree to the Imperial Zerg's request or not, I will return these natural sword ladies to you. If you aren't willing to give them to me, then I, Guhan, can use my own abilities to find an Imperial Zerg. It's just a matter of time. Guhan waved his hand and said, Your Majesty the Sea King, don't say that. I will try my best to persuade the members of the Sword Council to... The great sun sword immortal's heart had been completely taken over by Guhan. I don't care. I'll leave it to fate. Guhan smiled. Oh yes, there's one more thing. From now on, don't call me Your Majesty the Sea King. I prefer you to call me Sword Immortal Hongjun. Chapter 1353. On the morning of the third day, the great sun sword immortal answered Guhan's conditions with a face full of fatigue and 2 dark circles under his eyes. First of all, the request to push Lu Shihua to the top position was accepted. This suggestion was passed very quickly, so quickly that it exceeded the great sun sword immortal's expectations. This was because none of the immortal sword tier sword bearers in Yanjing City objected. All the sword bearers agreed to Guhan's request. This was something that the great sun sword immortal had not expected. Later, he found out that these immortal sword bearers all had family members trapped in the game and were saved by Guhan's help. They naturally owed Gahan a favor, so no one objected. But Guhan's second condition caused a huge debate in the Yin Jing City Sword Committee. Almost two-thirds of the immortal sword bearers strongly objected to handing the Imperial Zerg to Gahan to build the 9th base city. If not for the Great Sun Sword Immortal's insistence to satisfy Gahan's request, this meeting would probably have ended in failure. Yin Jing City's immortal sword tier swordbearers are a little too stingy, putting a precious Imperial Zerg in the warehouse to gather dust. Aren't you willing to contribute to the future of humanity? After hearing the Great Sun Sword Immortal's complaint, Guhan said unhappily, "It's not like that." The Great Sun Sword Immortal shook his head. If this Imperial Zerg was really just left in the warehouse to gather dust, then there wouldn't be such a big objection. After all, the Imperial Zerg from 2 base cities were all taken from our Yin Jing City warehouse. Back then, for the future of humanity, our seniors in Yin Jing City handed over this precious Imperial Zerg without any hesitation, let alone us juniors. But this Imperial Zerg is of great use to us in Yin Jing City. The Great Sun Sword Immortal sighed and said, "The 4th loop of Yin Jing City is almost full of people, and the industrial land in the 5th loop has long been occupied to the limit, to the extent that the special agricultural land in the 6th loop has begun to be occupied. The entire Yin Jing City has become extremely bloated. So since 5 years ago, Yin Jing City has been planning to build a new 7th ring and expand the land of Yin Jing City. This way, Yin Jing City can take a big breath and win more space for development in the next 100 years. I understand. Guhan smiled. Because we're expanding the 7th ring, we have to increase the coverage of the dimensional wall system. This way, we'll need a stronger core to support it, which is that Emperor Zerg, right? That's right. The Great Sun Sword Immortal nodded. In order to maintain the state of 6th ring, the 2 Imperial Zergs used in the core of Yin Jing City's dimensional wall system have reached the limit of expansion. If we want to expand it further, we need another Imperial Zerg. However, I only have 1 Emperor Zerg left in Beijing City's warehouse. If I give this Emperor Zerg to you, I'm afraid Beijing City will not be able to expand. The land in the 4th ring road will become more and more scarce, and the population will increase. The entire Beijing City will explode like a balloon that has been blown open. I understand Yin Jing City's intentions. In that case, my request to borrow your Imperial Zerg has been rejected by the Sword Committee," Gahan said calmly. There was no anger on his face. Actually, the Great Sun Sword Immortal should know that building a 9th base city and expanding Yin Jing City were 2 completely different things. Expanding Yin Jing City was just another round of fattening, but building a new 9th base city could allow humans to seize control of another area, and thus greatly reduce the territory of Yuanko in that area. The influence of a base city could allow nearly a province to be completely freed from the clutches of Yuanko, and once again become the territory of humans. As for the Great Sun Sword Immortal's concern about the population explosion in Yin Jing City, with a 9th base city, Gahan needed at least 30 million people to fill this base city. By then, the population problem in Yin Jing City would be solved. Similarly, there would be no need to worry about the population explosion for at least 100 years. It could also greatly alleviate the conflict in Yin Jing City. Therefore, the expansion of Yin Jing City was no longer a necessary thing. To humans, this was undoubtedly a great thing. But as the saying goes, one's position determines one's position. Although these immortal sword wielders in Yin Jing City knew in their hearts what was the most beneficial decision for humans. But as people of Yin Jing City, their eyes were naturally on Yin Jing City itself. If the 9th base city were to be built, then according to the rules of the other 7 base cities, the sword pavilions in the base cities would have to support a certain number of sword ladies to build the new sword pavilions. At the same time, the other base cities would have to transfer some sword bearers to become residents of the new base cities. Needless to say, Yin Jin would have to pay the lion's share. Yin Jin's power would be further weakened. which was something that the sword-bearers at the Saint Sword Pavilion would never want to see. So in the end, Yanjing City could only use the excuse that Yanjing City needed to expand to reject Gahan's request. This was also something that could be imagined. I'm sorry. I've already tried my best to persuade them, but they still... The great Sun Sword Immortal said with a face full of shame. It's fine. I understand. I won't force this matter. Guhan smiled and patted the great Sun Sword Immortal's shoulder. But I'll remember what happened today. To tell you the truth, I will build this 9th base city no matter what. Right? There is one thing that I hope Great Sun Sword Immortal can pass on to your Yanjing City Sword Committee. Guhan suddenly changed the topic. What is it? The Great Sun Sword Immortal was shocked. Could it be that this Gahan saw that he had not achieved his goal, so he wanted to propose a new condition? Great Sun Sword Immortal, I would like you to pass on a message to your Yanjing City Sword Committee. Since Yanjing City is afraid that I will weaken you, then I will give you a guarantee here. In the future, when my 9th base city is built, I will not want a single person from Yanjing City. I will not take away a single bit of power from Yanjing City. You can just stay in your Yanjing City. From today onwards, I will not allow a single person from Yanjing to step into my base city. This is what I want you to pass on to the Yanjing City Sword Committee. I understand. I will definitely pass on a message. The Great Sun Sword Immortal was confused by Gahan's words. It was as if Yanjing City had made a huge mistake by rejecting Gahan. This made the Great Sun Sword Immortal feel a little amused. Yanjing City was the safest base city in the world. If it wasn't for the forced mobilization of the government, why would anyone be willing to migrate to a newly built base city? By then, what the people of Yanjing fear the most would be the government forcing them to move to a new base city. So even if Gahan didn't say it, no one in Yanjing City would be willing to move to your base city. Although the Great Sun Sword Immortal felt that it was extremely amusing, he did not dare to show it. After all, from what Gahan had said, the other party did not intend to pursue the matter any further. Then this matter could be considered to have come to a successful conclusion. What was the point of doing something superfluous and unnecessary? So in the end, the Great Sun Sword Immortal bowed deeply to Gahan and left Gahan's room as if he was fleeing for his life. Gahan, you've really suffered a great loss this time. You've given away so many sisters, and in the end, you've only gotten a vase position. You've suffered a great loss. Seeing the Great Sun Sword Immortal leave, Zhu Xian jumped out of the scabbard at Gahan's waist and said mockingly, "That's right. These Yanjing people really don't know what's good for them. I've never liked these selfish Yanjing people since 800 years ago." Etian also jumped out with a wine bottle and said angrily with a face full of dissatisfaction. Qijian also came out. She was afraid that Gahan would feel sad, so she came out to comfort Gahan. "Gahan, don't be angry. There will be a time when they regret it. It's fine. All of this was within my expectations. It would be strange if the Yanjing people were willing to hand over their imperial zergs. I never had any hope for them from the start, but I've achieved my goal." Gahan walked to the window and looked at the Yanjing people on the streets. He said calmly, "I hate the people here. I don't like any Yanjing people appearing in my city. This is my true goal." Just an hour after the Great Sun Sword Immortal left, all the television stations in Yanjing City broadcasted the signal from the Sword Committee. This was a press conference organized by the Sword Committee of Yanjing City. When the Yanjing people saw this press conference, they knew that something big had happened in Yanjing City. Because other than Hao Tian and Jiandi, almost all the immortal sword wielders in Yanjing City had appeared at this press conference. Everyone's face was brimming with smiles. And as the main speaker, the Great Sun Sword Immortal was extremely happy. His face was full of smiles, and his body was full of excitement. He really announced to all the Yanjing people that the natural sword ladies that had been lost 2 years ago had all been found. Yanjing City's sword court had recovered to its most complete state. Yanjing City's honor had returned. This news made the entire Yanjing City silent for close to 10 seconds. Then, In a short moment, the entire Yinjing city exploded into thunderous cheers. Almost every corner of Yinjing city could hear the excited screams of the citizens. Some citizens even rushed to the streets and held hands and spontaneously danced. The area around the hotel that Gahan was in was naturally no exception. All the public buses stopped. Those drivers and passengers who were listening to the broadcast also jumped off the buses. They sang and danced crazily with the citizens on the streets to celebrate this wonderful news. It was so noisy that Gohan's ears hurt. Chapter 1354. After the apocalypse, the people of Yinjin had an instinctive sense of superiority. Not only did they look down on the people of Yuzhong Bay City, but they also looked down on the people of the other 6 base cities. The new Yinjin was the first base city to be rebuilt, and a savior like Kinzu had come from that city. The people of Yinjin had their noses raised to the sky. How could the other base cities compare with Yinjing? The other base cities had records of being conquered, but Yinjin had never been conquered in the past 1,000 years. That was enough for the people of Yinjin to be proud of for the rest of their lives. Yinjin was indeed powerful. Although the people of the other base cities were dissatisfied with the attitude of the people of Yinjin, they could not refute it. In the eyes of the people of the other base cities, Yinjin was indeed the most powerful base city. What they desired the most was to move to Yinjin and become a Yinjin citizen. However, in the past 2 years, the other base cities had found a reason to mock Yinjin. The sword tower had lost 1/10 of its natural sword ladies, and they had been betrayed by their own traitor. That was something that had never happened in the other base cities. Yinjin was the only one that had ever happened. That was the perfect reason to mock Yinjin. As a result, the people of Yinjin had been living in such mockery during the past 2 years. Countless netizens had been posting posts on various forums to mock the people of Yinjin. They would mention Yinjin intentionally or unintentionally. For example, the sword tower in our city is so beautiful. It's not like the sword tower in Yinjin. It's beautiful, but it's empty inside. For example, my neighbor was robbed. That thief was awesome. Luckily, he wasn't in Yinjin. Otherwise, he would have stolen everything from the sword tower in Yinjin. The netizens, who couldn't wait to bring up the Yinjing sword pavilion in every sentence, provoked the anger in the hearts of the Yinjing people to the extreme. But just like the people of the other base cities could not refute the arrogance of the people of Yinjin, the people of Yinjin could not refute the mockery of others either. After all, the sword ladies of the sword tower had been lost, and they had been stolen by their own people. The people of Yinjing had been suppressing such a matter for 2 years, and they had long been filled with anger. Now that they suddenly heard the great Sun Sword Immortal announce that those lost natural sword ladies had returned, the people of Yinjing felt that their 2 years of depression and anger had been instantly released. No one dared to use such a matter to mock Yinjing City anymore. The high and mighty status of the people of Yinjing had returned. Of course, the people of Yinjing would happily rush onto the streets, cheering for this wonderful thing. However, after the celebration, the people of Yinjing found that they were still being ridiculed on the internet. This was because the great Sun Sword Immortal had admitted at the press conference that these natural sword ladies had been found with the help of Yuzhong City's Hongjun Sword Immortal Guhan. All the members of the Yinjing City Sword Committee bowed to Guhan at the press conference, expressing their gratitude. Actually, a portion of the Sword Immortal level sword bearers were not willing to do this, but the Great Sun Sword Immortal had forced them to. Because the Great Sun Sword Immortal knew that Yinjin City's rejection of Gahan had made Gahan extremely unhappy. If Gahan was just a normal Sword Immortal level sword bearer, it would be fine. But Gahan could very likely become an Emperor sword bearer on par with Kinzu in the future. It was better to resolve this grudge as soon as possible. Anyway, it was just a bow. He would not lose a piece of flesh. It was no big deal. But what the Great Sun Sword Immortal did not expect was that this would become a new reason for the people of other cities to mock the people of Yinjin. These laughable people of Yinjin still have the face to dance. The sword ladies were all found by Sword Immortal Hongjun. In the end, Yanjin City still has to rely on Yuzhong City's help. This is a huge joke. It's really too funny. Among them, the people of Yuzhong City, who were the worst in Yanjing City, were the happiest to ridicule Guhan. Because Guhan was from Yuzhong City, Yanjing City owed Yuzhong City a big favor. They could finally vent their anger that had accumulated for a year. There is nothing more joyous than this. In the face of such ridicule, the Yanjing people still felt a little aggrieved, but at least they felt more comfortable than before. Forget it, the noble Yanjing people would not bother with these tasteless country bumpkins. The day after the press conference ended, the great Sun Sword Immortal came to Guhan's hotel again. What else is there? Seeing the great Sun Sword Immortal appear again, Guhan asked curiously. It's like this. Due to the rejection of the Imperial Zergs, the Yanjin City Sword Committee feels very bad. Therefore, we have decided to give Sword Immortal Hong Jun 10th million hero coins as compensation. We hope that Sword Immortal Hong Jun can understand Yanjin City's difficulties. The great Sun Sword Immortal said sincerely. From this, it could be seen that the Yanjin City Sword Committee was very afraid of Guhan. Otherwise, they would not have taken the initiative to give 10 million hero coins to make up for Guhan's dissatisfaction. Guhan had to admit that Yanjin City's actions had indeed made up for his good impression in Guhan's heart. As the saying went, one did not hit a smiling person. Moreover, this was a smiling person who had given him 10 million hero coins. Therefore, Guhan still squeezed out a smile and accepted the hero coins without hesitation. But what Guhan did not expect was that when the hero coins were transferred through his personal terminal did not have 10 million hero coins, but 20 million hero coins. Why is there another 10 million? Guhan asked in confusion. Oh, the remaining 10 million hero coins are your reward from the Sword Committee. The great Sun Sword Immortal explained with a smile. You fought Zhou with your wits and risked your life to enter the dungeon alone to save 2 million souls. Those are all great contributions. The Sword Committee will definitely reward you. But because your contributions are too great, the Sword Committee could not come to a consensus on how to reward you. It was only yesterday that they finally came to a consensus and decided to reward you with 10 million hero coins. So in total, it will be 20 million hero coins. Thank you very much. Guhan smiled at the great Sun Sword Immortal again. The great Sun Sword Immortal repeatedly said, "You're welcome," and prepared to leave Guhan's residence. Wait, Guhan suddenly called out to the great Sun Sword Immortal. The great Sun Sword Immortal turned around in confusion and heard Guhan say calmly, "Since Yanjing City is so sincere and great Sun Sword Immortal has helped me so much after my base city is built, I will give Yanjing City a quota of 1,000 immigrants, and you, great Sun Sword Immortal, an immigration quota of 100. Thank you." The great Sun Sword Immortal didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Who would care about the immigration quota for a base city that hadn't even been established yet? And even if it was established, even if the great Sun Sword Immortal was given 10,000 immigration quotas, he wouldn't send a single family member away from Yanjing City. This quota was a little too useless for him. Although he was complaining in his heart, the great Sun Sword Immortal had no reason to reject it. In the end, he could only smile and accept it. I was just worrying about what to do with your sword marks. Who would have thought that these hero coins would come to me? Guhan turned around and smiled at the 4 sword ladies behind him. Excuse me, I would like to exchange for a new dimensional pocket, an elderly sword wielder said to a staff member behind the counter with a smile. 2,333 hero coins, the staff member behind the counter said with a stiff expression. Why did the price increase again? Wasn't it still 2,200 hero coins 3 months ago? The elderly sword wielder cried out when he heard the staff member's price. Now is a time when resources are tight. Why are you spouting so much nonsense? Are you going to exchange or not? If not, then hurry up and leave. Don't stand here and get in the way. The staff member said angrily when he heard the elderly sword wielder say this. He even rolled his eyes at him for free. You saw The elderly sword wielder was angry at first, but in the end, he retreated helplessly. He could only accept his fate and take out another 133 hero coins. This was something that could not be helped. If this staff member was a staff member from another place, the elderly sword wielder would have used his status to viciously rebuke him. But the staff members of the Merit Store were not ordinary staff members. They were staff members with extremely deep backgrounds. Although the staff members of the Merit Store were also ordinary people, what kind of place was a Merit Store? It was a unit under the direct management of the Sword Committee. Moreover, it was the unit under the Sword Committee that had the most profits. After all, the Merit Store was in charge of exchanging for rare goods that could only be exchanged with hero coins. There were precious goods that could not be bought with RMB. Working in such a place, as long as a small report of the Swordmar powder was lost and the bottle of Swordmar powder was sold on the black market, it could easily be exchanged for 1,000 RMB. A lost dimensional pocket could be exchanged for a super high value of 3 million RMB. As long as one did not lose anything too precious, the Sword Committee would turn a blind eye to such things. A small staff member, as long as they did their job properly and did not leave any evidence, could easily earn hundreds of thousands of RMB in a month. It was simply the best job in the world. This job was so good that one should not expect to work in the Merit Store. Almost all the staff members here were from the Emperor Sword World or the descendants of the Sword Immortal family. These descendants did not have the talent to become sword wielder. In order to make their lives richer and easier, their elders, who held real power, thought of all kinds of ways to stuff them into the Merit Store. This was extremely normal. No matter how many years had passed, as long as politics were in the hands of humans, this kind of abuse of power for personal gain was absolutely something that could not be prohibited. There was nothing strange about it. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.